Chapter 888. Led by Grand Tutor Chu, several famous scholars in the capital are no longer just asking for the King of Shu to return and take charge of the Eastern Palace. In the past 2 days there have been rumors among the officials they influence that you are the sycophant who obstructed the peace talks between the Qi and Jing kingdoms, stirring up a foul atmosphere in the court. Li Yi didn't continue her words. Instead he asked, "Tomorrow is the 13th. How are the preparations going?" Emingzu nodded and said, "Father has already personally issued the edict. It can be announced at any time. You can arrange the time yourself." Then she frowned and looked at him. "If you really had any ideas you should have told me in advance. Their target this time is you. Don't always look so indifferent." "It doesn't matter if I didn't," Li Yi said somewhat helplessly. "The Chu family has been caught red-handed, so we have no choice but to work hard. In terms of influence in the imperial court, all of us combined are no match for that Grand Tutor. If they want to talk, let them talk. We can't shut their mouths." Emingzu was startled. She asked in confusion, "What blackmailed the Chu family?" "The Chu family." Li Yi had just opened his mouth when he suddenly looked at Li Xian, who was standing to the side. He asked, "Is there something on my face?" "No." Li Xian shook his head without hesitation. "Then why do you keep looking at me?" Li Xian shrugged. "Other than you and Emingzu, there are only the two of you here. If I don't look at you, am I supposed to look at myself?" It was one thing to look, but to look for an hour and mumble while looking was quite abnormal. He glanced at Li Xian and said to Emingzu, "Let's go over there and talk." On the bustling streets of the capital, the goddess of Luo Shui tilted her head and looked at Li Yi. She asked in confusion, "Where are we going?" Li Yi said casually, "We have nothing to do anyway. Let's just walk around." Zheng Zumo looked at him and asked, "Do you remember what day it is today?" Li Yi was puzzled. "April 13th, what's wrong?" "It's nothing." She shook her head and looked ahead. She pointed and said, "There's a new jewelry shop over there. Let's go take a look." The goddess of Luo Shui wasn't in a good mood today. Along the way she didn't buy anything. She lowered her head and was lost in her thoughts. Only when the two of them were far away from the bustling city and there were fewer and fewer people around them did she finally come back to her senses. She looked around and looked at Li Yi. She asked doubtfully, "Why did we walk here?" Li Yi raised his head and looked at the plaque above the gate, which read, "Zheng Residence." He held her hand and smiled, "Let's go in." Zheng Zumo's body almost subconsciously paused. This used to be the place she was most familiar with, but also the place she was most unfamiliar with. It had carried her sweetest and happiest memories and was also the beginning of the longest nightmare she had ever had. She held Li Yi's hand tightly and looked back at him. Their eyes met for a moment. Then she turned back and let out a long sigh. She nodded and said, "Let's go." The two of them stepped on the stone steps. Li Yi pushed the door open. The heavy wooden door made a creaking sound, revealing a dozen figures behind the door. "Uncle Ho." Zheng Zumo looked at the old man who was bowing at the front. After a moment of daze she looked back with surprise on her face. "Uncle Qi Nani Hua Xiaomei, you are Xiaomei. How did you, miss?" The dozen people all bowed. The old man at the front raised his head and said with a smile, "Miss, welcome home." Her mind was blank. Holding Li Yi's hand, she was led into the Zheng residence by him. Only then did she realize that this place was completely different from the last 2 times she had been here. More than a decade ago, when she was still in the Zheng residence, there should be a stone pavilion on the left side of the garden. Whenever it rained, she didn't want to stay in the stuffy room. She would sit in the stone pavilion, watching the mist in the sky and listening to the pitter-patter of rain. She didn't see the stone pavilion the last 2 times she came to the Zheng residence. It must have been torn down. This time, it miraculously appeared in front of her eyes. Whether it was in the position or the direction it was facing, it was exactly the same as she remembered. The previous 2 times she saw a few small houses that didn't exist for more than a decade. They must have been built in recent years. This time they disappeared as well and an empty space under the wall reappeared. A long time ago when the weather was fine she would play shuttlecock with the maids in the Zheng residence. In the entire Zheng residence she was the only one who could play shuttlecock without hitting the ground after 100 times. The decoration in the front hall was also very different from the last time. Tables, chairs, screens. These things began to overlap with the Zheng residence in her memory. This was the Zheng residence, the only Zheng residence in her heart. She looked at Li Yi and wanted to ask him something. However, Li Yi had already pulled her into his arms and whispered in her ear, "This is your birthday present. Do you like it?" Only then did she realize what he meant when he asked her, "Do you like it here?" The last time they came to the Zheng family's house he asked her, "Do you like it here?" She didn't know how he got the Zheng residence from those people. She only knew that this was his birthday present for her, and that was enough. The imperial edict has arrived. A sharp and piercing voice suddenly rang out from outside. She hurriedly escaped from Li Yi's embrace and saw two fair-skinned, beardless men walking in. The eunuch glanced at them and said coldly, "His Majesty has an edict. Kneel and accept it." Other than Li Yi and Zheng Zumo, all the servants of the Zheng residence knelt on the ground and didn't dare to raise their heads in fear. Zheng Zumo was about to kneel as well, but Li Yi grabbed her wrist and glared at the eunuch. The eunuch shivered and immediately put on a smile that was uglier than crying. He quickly said, "Miss, you don't have to kneel. His Majesty specifically said that the court has wronged Sir Zheng. Miss, just stand and listen." He opened the edict and said in a loud voice, "The edict reads, the previous Minister of Revenue Zheng Shiji was loyal and dutiful. He worked hard and made great contributions. However, he was framed by a villain and the court misjudged him. Now that the investigation has been carried out, we should set things right. Reward the Zheng clan with 10,000 gold and 1,000 bolts of silk. The Zheng clan will be restored. Sir Zheng was wronged and will be posthumously conferred the title of Marquis of Loyalty." After reading it, he looked up anxiously and said, "Miss Zheng, please accept the edict." Seeing that she was standing there in a daze, Li Yi took the edict. The two eunuchs sighed in relief and left immediately. Li Yi held the imperial edict, looked at her and said in a low voice, "The imperial edict begins with the imperial edict. It is meant to announce to the world that the Zheng family was wrongly accused, and the world will return their innocence to them." She looked up with tears in her eyes. This is also your—" Li Yi wiped away the tears at the corner of her eyes and said softly, "This is the second gift I'm giving you." As soon as he finished speaking, his lips were kissed by her. It wasn't a light touch like before. Her tongue pried open his teeth. Although the movement was jerky, it was wild and passionate like never before. The servants of the Zheng clan had already left. When Zheng Shichen came in, he happened to see this scene. Ahem. After standing there for a long time, he finally couldn't help but cough. The goddess of Luo Shui was like a frightened rabbit. She pushed Li Yi away in a hurry and clasped her hands together. She said helplessly, "Second uncle." Clang. Zheng Shichen felt like he was struck by lightning. The thing in his hand fell to the ground. Chapter 889. Zheng Shichen hurriedly picked up a box from the ground and put it on the table. "This is the contract of Steward Ho and the others. From now on let them stay here." The blush on Zheng Zumo's face hadn't disappeared. She lowered her head and didn't dare to look at anyone. "Thank you, second uncle." Hearing this title again after so many years, Zheng Shichen couldn't hide the joy on his face. He also let out a long sigh of relief. She was willing to call him second uncle, which meant that she had let go of the knot in her heart from 13 years ago. This was also the knot in his heart that he couldn't let go of for a long time. "Then, I'll leave first." Zheng Shichen looked at them, especially at Li Yi's face, for a long time. He then turned around and left, closing the door on his way out. The Luo Shui goddess still had her head down. Li Yi sat on the chair and pulled her over. "He's gone, let's continue." "Continue what?" The Luo Shui goddess's voice was almost inaudible. Li Yi didn't answer. Instead, he used his actions to tell her what to continue. After an unknown amount of time, she lazily leaned against Li Yi's chest. Her eyes were blurred as she murmured, "Do you still remember what it was like when we first met?" Li Yi grabbed her hand and said, "At that time I also grabbed your hand like this and you still thought I was a lecher. You are a lecher?" Zheng Zumo removed her hand from his waist and said with a blush, "So be it. It's good to be a lecher." Li Yi put his hand back and said shamelessly. She symbolically struggled for a while before letting him be. She murmured, "I still remember that time in the Jadeite courtyard. You rushed up from below the stage and asked me if I had transmigrated from Earth. From then on, I was curious. What is Earth and what is transmigration?" Now that Li Yi thought about it, he found it a little funny. Not long after he came to this world, he happened to hear someone singing Immortal Magpie Bridge, which only existed in another world. Naturally, he was surprised and happy, but in the end, it was just a misunderstanding. However, if not for that beautiful misunderstanding, there would be no such scene. He couldn't help hugging her tightly and said with a smile, "It's a secret." She grew up here and naturally had an unforgettable feeling for this place. When the two walked out of the room, Li Yi had already discussed with her. They would go back to Willow Lane to tidy up and move here with Juan and Ruoching in a few days. She had never dared to do something like that before. Moreover, she did it in front of these people whom she had known since she was young. Therefore, after she walked out of the room, she blushed and lowered her head. Especially when she saw Tseng Shichen standing in front of her, even her white and tender neck was covered with a layer of pink. This time, the Chui family's target is not only the king of Shu, but also you. Tseng Shichen glared at him vaguely before saying, "It may not be peaceful in the near future. Be careful." Tseng Zumo looked at Li Yi worriedly and asked, "Are they going to do something bad to you?" Li Yi helped her tidy up her slightly messy hair and said, "Don't worry. Who do you think your husband is? The Chui family is more than 1,000 years too early to make trouble for me. Now is not the time. No matter what happens, it's best to wait and see." Tseng Shichen looked at him and said, "The Chu family's influence is too wide. If you can't kill them in one strike, there will be endless trouble. Now is not the time for you to act." Tseng Shichen said it was not the right time. Li Yi could naturally understand. For example, Grand Tutor Chu's precious grandson had some strange hobbies and was related to the missing girl some time ago. But because he was the grandson of the Chu family, he was secretly let go. If this matter was revealed at a normal time, it would at most affect the Chu family's reputation a little. With Grand Tutor Chu around, the Chu family could still stand tall. However, if he was the happiest person in the Chu clan and used the clan's accumulated reputation to do something, it would be like a sharp blade that could destroy the foundation of the clan. Moreover, if they didn't drag things out, who knew who else would jump out at the crucial moment in court? In a pavilion in the middle of the lake, Li Yi was teaching Yongning how to fish. She had almost completely integrated into this world. After all, she was still young and her worldview had not formed. When she grew older, she probably wouldn't have a clear impression of the other world. "How can you still sit here?" Li Xian walked over from behind and said with a frown, "News just came from the palace. The court is almost in an uproar." Even Uncle Huang was alarmed and went straight to the Great Hall. "You're actually fishing here? Then what can I do?" Li Yi glanced at him and said, "Fight with those old scholars? Won't they have another reason to impeach me?" "The matter of your impeachment has already been suppressed by Emingzu." Li Xian shook his head and said, "In court, led by Grand Tutor Chu and accompanied by 4 scholars, those people are jointly asking Uncle Huang to issue an edict to transfer the king of Shu back to the capital." Li Yi held Yongning's small hand and helped her stabilize the fishing rod. He then gently pulled it up and a fat carp jumped out of the water. The little girl let go of the fishing rod and shook Li Yi's arm. She said excitedly, "Brother, a fish has taken the bait." Li Yi patted her head and said with a smile, "This fish, I'll make fish soup for Yongning later." In the Great Hall, His Majesty had just lost his temper. The atmosphere in the Great Hall was heavy and deathly silent. Grand Tutor Chu looked up and got up from his chair. Leaning on his walking stick, he moved step by step to the center of the Great Hall. "His Majesty's body is unwell. It's best to appoint a crown prince as soon as possible to establish the foundation of the country and settle the hearts of the people. The King of Shu is the son of concubine Chui and is also His Majesty's eldest son. He has a respected status and is in line with the ancestral rules. He is the best candidate to live in the East Palace." He covered his mouth and coughed a few times. He put down his walking stick, cupped his fists and bowed. He said loudly, "Your Majesty, please summon the King of Shu back to the capital." Among the hundreds of officials, 4 white-haired old men walked out and stood behind Grand Tutor Chu. They bowed deeply and said loudly, "Your Majesty, please summon the King of Shu back to the capital." In the Great Hall, many officials looked at each other and walked out. "Your Majesty, please summon the King of Shu back to the capital." "Your Majesty, please summon the King of Shu back to the capital." "Your Majesty, please summon the King of Shu back to the capital." Everyone's voices resounded throughout the hall. Even though there were a few different voices, they were quickly drowned out. Chui Qingming was also in the crowd with a smile on his face. "They don't look like courtiers at all." In front of the crowd, Prime Minister Shen's face darkened. He said angrily, "What are they doing? They are forcing the emperor to abdicate." Seeing this, Qin Xiang shook his head with a complicated expression. Emperor Jing slowly rose from his throne and looked down. His gaze finally stopped on Grand Tutor Chu's face. His chest rose and fell slightly as he slowly said, "Grand Tutor, are you forcing us?" "I dare not force your Majesty." Grand Tutor Chu lifted his head, his gaze calm. "I'm doing this for the world, for the people of the Jing kingdom and for His Majesty." He tidied up his robe, knelt on the ground and said loudly, Your Majesty, please issue the decree. Your Majesty, please issue the decree. Your Majesty, please issue the decree. The sound waves grew louder and louder, as if they were going to overturn the roof of the great hall. Emperor Jing revealed a sorrowful expression. He pointed downwards and murmured, You all? Changde immediately stepped forward and said anxiously, Your Majesty, the dragon's body is more important. Emingzi quickly walked over from the side and said, Bring Imperial Father to rest first. After a few eunuchs accompanied Emperor Jing and left, she walked down the steps and looked at Grand Tutor Chu and asked, Grand Tutor, how long are you going to kneel for? Grand Tutor Chu raised his head and said expressionlessly, As long as His Majesty does not issue the decree, this old man will not get up. Chapter 890. Li Yi and Li Xian were waiting outside the hall. When an imperial physician came out, Li Xian quickly walked over and asked anxiously, How is Uncle Huang? The imperial physician sighed and shook his head. Li Xian's expression changed. He grabbed his collar and asked, Is it serious? Why do you say that, Your Highness? The imperial physician was surprised and said, His Majesty was just temporarily stimulated. His mood was too unstable, causing his condition to relapse. Li Xian relaxed and glared at him. Then why did you shake your head just now? My neck was a little stiff just now, so I moved it a little, the imperial physician sighed and then said, However, you still have to pay more attention in the future. His Majesty's condition really can't take any more stimulation. Get out, get out, get out. Li Xian kicked the imperial physician's buttocks and waved his hand impatiently. After the eunuch reported, the two entered the hall. Emperor Jing was lying on a soft couch inside and waved at them from a distance. Li Xian quickly walked over and said, Uncle Huang, the dragon's health is more important. You can let Emingzi handle these matters of the court. If they want to kneel, let them kneel until they die in the hall. It will save us some trouble. What a stupid thing to say. Prince Ning glared at him and said, If the current Grand Tutor of the court kneels until he dies in the Golden Hall, how will the world talk about His Majesty? I don't mind. Emperor Jing shook his head and looked at Li Yi. He said, You have been wronged. What you have done is beneficial to the country and the people. It is a good deed that will last for generations, but you are regarded as a sycophant. Li Yi looked at Emperor Jing's pale face and said, Whether it is a good deed or a bad deed, the future generations will judge. Moreover, the people are not stupid. They can't be toyed with as they like. I believe that the world will naturally give me justice. Seeing the fatigue on his face, Li Xian stood up and said, Uncle Huang, please rest well. We won't disturb you any longer. After leaving the hall, the smile on Li Xian's face immediately disappeared. He said angrily, Are these old fellows trying to force me to abdicate and rebel? Li Yi patted him on the shoulder and said, You just can't stay calm when something happens. Don't worry, let's go and take a look first. In the main hall, Emperor Jing covered his chest and coughed a few times before slowly saying, I can feel that I don't have much time left. Pain appeared in King Ning's eyes. Imperial brother? Emperor Jing looked out of the hall. After a long time he said, At first, I also thought that you should take this position. Without waiting for him to finish, Prince Ning immediately bowed. Imperial brother, you must not do this. We know that you don't want to be trapped in this position. Otherwise the one lying here right now would be you. Emperor Jing narrowed his eyes slightly and said, In the end, this world should belong to those young people. Prince Ning nodded and said, Emingzi and Xian did not disappoint us. The Chui family has the ambition of wolves. Emperor Jing looked at Prince Ning again. This time, I'm afraid you will have to personally go back to Qing and Fu. Prince Ning bowed and said in a low voice, As you command. When Li Yi and Li Xian walked to the main hall, they coincidentally ran into Emingzi coming out from inside. She asked, What's the situation inside? Emingzi shook her head and said, With Grand Tutor Chu as the leader, there are more than 20 people still kneeling inside. Li Yi walked into the main hall and saw that other than the group of people kneeling on the ground, the other officials had already left. The elder at the very front was kneeling on the ground. He must be the Grand Tutor Chu that he had met twice. He walked to the front. Grand Tutor Chu heard the sound of footsteps and slowly raised his head. Li Yi hurriedly waved his hand and said, Grand Tutor, there is no need to be so courteous. Please rise, I really cannot accept such a great courtesy from you. How dare you? How dare you? Before Grand Tutor Chu could speak, a series of harsh voices came from behind him. The four scholars looked at him angrily. The officials of the court behind him all shrank their necks and did not say a word. Grand Tutor Chu's expression was calm as he lightly said, I kneel for the world and the ancestral system. When the emperor is ill, the Eastern Palace should be established to stabilize the court and the people. This is the rule set by the ancestors. Do you really want to be a treacherous official who disregards the ancestral system and causes trouble for the world? Such a heavy crime, this junior can't afford to bear it. Li shook his head and bent down. In a small voice he said, I am only worried that your grandson, a young man in the prime of his youth, will injure his legs if he kneels for too long. Grand Tutor, you're already so old. If something bad happens to you and you collapse, I presume that official Chui, who does not wish to reveal his name, will be very sad? The old man looked at him and his gaze suddenly froze. What did you say? Li looked at him and asked, forming a clique for personal gain and pressuring the emperor in the Golden Palace. Is this the righteousness that Grand Tutor, as a scholar of the Jing Kingdom? Grand Tutor Chu's gaze slightly froze. He coldly said, My righteousness is not for you to judge. Grand Tutor's reputation is illustrious. Naturally I cannot judge. Li once again lowered his voice and slowly said, I wonder if those women who have been trampled upon by your grandson, who have been seriously injured in both body and mind, can be judged. Grand Tutor Chu's expression changed. He stood up shakily with the help of his walking stick and pointed it at Fan Xian. In a trembling voice he said, You traitor, don't you dare sully the Chu family's clean name. The Chu family's clean name for 100 years is not easy to obtain. Grand Tutor, please reconsider. Don't casually use it to gamble. Li shook his head and turned to leave. The people in the hall looked at the dazed Grand Tutor Chu and looked at each other. An old man finally could not help but ask, Grand Tutor? Grand Tutor Chu waved his hand and said, Get up. We will discuss this matter at length when we return. Watching the people leave the hall from afar, Li Xian asked in confusion, What did you say to that old man? Li watched the group leave and said, I told him that the old man's body is weak and that kneeling for too long is not good for his health. That's all? What else? Li shook his head and said, This is for his own good. If he still does not listen, then he can only blame himself. Li Xian shook his head and said resolutely, Impossible. That old man is as stubborn as a rock. Let alone kneeling until his legs are broken, even if he kneels to death, he will not easily compromise. Li waved his hand and said, Fine. Actually, I told him that His Highness said that if they do not get up, they will all be beheaded and hung at the palace gates as lanterns. The Chu family will be exterminated, the men will be exiled and the women will be sold to the brothels. They will not be allowed to sleep without receiving 100 customers a day. Just ask him if he is afraid. Li Xian was stunned and murmured, Isn't this too cruel? Li patted his shoulder again and said, If you are not so cruel, they will not be afraid. Outside the palace gates, Cui Qingming slowly followed behind Grand Tutor Chu and said, Don't worry, Grand Tutor. All the evidence of that incident has already been destroyed. What he said is nothing more than slanderous slander and framing others. No matter what he does now, even if he finds those women and points them out, people will only think that he is desperate and will not be able to do anything. His eyes flickered and he said firmly, Now that the situation has been decided, as long as Grand Tutor puts in a little more effort, the great event will be possible. Chapter 891. Jianghu had always been a troublesome place, but too many things had happened in recent days. First, a fugitive killed someone on the Lantern Festival in a cruel way. Then, a woman near Jianghu disappeared inexplicably. The wanted poster of the fugitive had been posted all over Jianghu, but there was no result until now. The case of the missing woman was solved, but it was not perfect. 2 other women had not been found. Later, the envoy of the Qi Kingdom came from afar to negotiate for peace. It was publicized quite enthusiastically for 2 days, but there was no news about it after that. In the middle of April, it was said that led by the Grand Tutor and several famous scholars forced the emperor to issue an edict to summon the king of Shu, the eldest son of the emperor, back to Jianghu and live in the East Palace. Everyone knew why the king of Shu was expelled from Jianghu at that time. If he had taken another step forward, it would have been a great crime equivalent to rebellion. Merely being expelled was already a mercy beyond the law. It was said that on that day in the hall, His Majesty was so angry that his old illness relapsed. The Grand Tutor and the others knelt in the hall and refused to get up. They did not know what happened after that. In any case, the imperial edict to summon the king of Shu back had not been issued. However, it was faintly heard that the Grand Tutor Chu and those scholars were going to carry out some activities to clean up the side of the emperor, aiming at the Minister of Honor, Li Yi County Marquis Li, who was the most favored by the emperor. Everyone knew that County Marquis Li and the princess had done a lot of good things for the world and helped many people live a good life. However, this kind of thing was planned by the scholars in the upper class. They couldn't participate in it at all. Of course they wouldn't participate in it. After all, this matter was led by the Grand Tutor, who was like a saint in the hearts of the people. Even those who were very firm in heart couldn't help but be shaken when thinking of this. This was a game between the bigwigs and they could only watch from afar. What was strange was that no matter how the opponents slandered, County Marquis Li didn't do anything, which made it difficult for countless people to guess. After all, this matter didn't only involve himself. Even the officials and forces in Jianghu who had some relations with him were greatly affected because of this matter. In the government office of the capital, County Magistrate Lu was having a headache because of a street fight. Fighting was just a small matter, but when the people involved in the fight, one was a member of the Chui family, and the other was just a commoner, and the Chui family was not in the right, the matter was a little difficult to deal with. In front of the hall, an old man revealed a smile and said, "Hee, Lord Lu, how should this case be judged? Please quickly give us a definite answer. My young master will have a banquet in a while." County Magistrate Lu couldn't remember when was the last time someone talked to him like this in the court. Could it be that this housekeeper of the Chui residence thought that since Lord Li was at a disadvantage, the Chui family could be more arrogant in the capital? He looked at the disdainful young man standing in the middle of the hall, waved his hand and said, "Fighting in the street, disregarding the law. You will be punished with 10 strokes of the cane and driven out of the county government." In the court, the young man's expression changed and he shouted, "How dare you!" The old man was startled and his face also became gloomy. He said in a low voice, "Lord Lu, don't forget who my young master is and don't forget who you are. What a coincidence. I'm not afraid of threats at all, especially threats from your Chui family." County Magistrate Lu smiled and said, "This man disturbed the court and dared to threaten me. For the sake of your age I won't beat him. Just throw him out as well." Seeing the government runners drag the two people out, the smile on his face gradually disappeared. He clenched his fists, looked at the sky and murmured, "Lord Li, what are you thinking?" His face alternated between doubt, hesitation, worry and fear. After a while, all kinds of complex emotions turned into determination. He walked out of the hall and ordered a government runner, "Prepare the carriage, I need to go out. Shanning, move a little to the right, hold Yongning, hold her, not her head. Never mind, put your hand on her shoulder." Li Yi instructed the proud Lolita, and then picked up the brush again and drew on the spread paper. The weather was good today, and he originally planned to draw a family portrait. Rui was holding Li Duan, Xiao Huan and Rui were standing on her side, and finally he would Photoshop himself, and this family portrait would be perfect. However, the proud Lolita came over and she insisted on joining in. With her, of course, Yongning, so the small family became a big family. The little guy couldn't stay quiet for long. After a while he started to cry and make a fuss. Rui had to coax him. Fortunately, her part had been finished. As long as he added others, it would not be difficult for him. After finishing the painting, he sent the proud Lolita and Yongning to play, and then he had time to lie in the yard, enjoying a moment of peace. Not long after he closed his eyes, a pair of hands appeared on his shoulders, gently massaging him. Ruyi's voice was soft, "I've heard about the things that are spreading outside." Li opened his eyes and asked in surprise, "What is it?" "They say that hubby is a sycophant." Li sighed and said, "I thought I hid it well, but I never expected them to see through me. In fact, from a certain point of view, Old Man Chu and company were right. At the very least, he had hidden the fact that he wanted to make Princess Royal Empress from the old emperor. If one were to really think about it, compared to this treasonous matter, what the Chui family did was nothing." Rui wasn't surprised by his words. After some thought, she said solemnly, "If hubby is a sycophant, then I'm the wife of the sycophant. When the sycophant and his wife join forces, there's no one to be afraid of." Li grabbed her hand and said with a smile, "Don't worry. One sycophant is enough to deal with these people. The sycophant's son is crying again. It's best you coax the sycophant's wife." Rui went to coax the restless Li Duan. Mississippi Lu walked over from behind and stood in front of him. She looked down at him and asked, "How much longer are you going to wait?" Lying on the recliner to look at Mississippi Lu, he felt like he was looking up at her. Li shook his head and said, "Those are all great Confucian scholars. In terms of influence, I can't compare to them. I have an idea. Rui, why don't you visit those stubborn old fogies one by one at night? You don't have to beat them to death. All you have to do is beat them until they are paralyzed and unable to take care of themselves. That way they won't be able to run around stirring up trouble. All right. Mississippi Lu simply agreed. The next moment she disappeared in front of Li Yi. Suddenly losing sight of Mississippi Lu, Li Yi was startled. He immediately jumped up from the rocking chair and chased after her. He shouted, "Wait a minute. Let's discuss it again. Maybe there's another way." He didn't catch up with Mississippi Lu. Instead he saw Li Xian and the eldest princess who came together. When the three of them walked back in, someone also came out from another high door. A middle-aged man said apologetically, "Prime Minister Qin, I'm really sorry. My father hasn't been feeling well recently and is resting in bed. He won't see anyone." Prime Minister Qin looked at the two carriages parked in front of the Chu residence. He didn't say anything. He just looked at the middle-aged man and said lightly, "I have something to say. Tell the Grand Tutor that Qin Wen is grateful for his teaching back then. But today he wants to destroy the pillar of the Jing kingdom. I beg to differ." Inside the hall, Li Yi had just asked Li Xian and the eldest princess to sit down. Before the tea was served, Fang walked in from outside and said, "Marty, Lord Tseng is here. Tseng Shichen should be here soon." Li Yi nodded and said, "Invite him in." Tseng Shichen was wearing casual clothes today. When he walked into the hall he looked up and was stunned at first. Then he immediately bowed and said, "Tseng Shichen greets the princess and the crown prince." Chapter 892. As though he hadn't expected the princess and the crown prince to be present, Tseng Shichen lowered his head and drank his tea without saying a word. Li Xian glanced at him and raised his brows. "Sir, is there something you need?" Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Ignore Lord Tseng for now. Speak your mind." Li Xian looked at him before looking at Tseng Shichen. He seemed to understand something before he frowned and asked, "You actually asked me what I need? Don't you know why we're here?" Li Yi shook his head. "What? Let me make this clear. If the Academy of Sciences runs out of funds, don't look for me. Look for Emingzu to borrow it. My family has high expenses. She can't even spend her money." Purge the emperor's side. Li Xian slapped the table and said, "That old man Chu has taken the lead to purge the emperor's side on behalf of Uncle Huang. He wants to get rid of the sycophants, but you're still sitting here drinking tea?" He said angrily, "Although old man Chu is respected and the Chu family has an extraordinary influence in the world of officials, making it nearly impossible to find any flaws, you can't just sit here and wait for death. It's not like I can't find any flaws." Tseng Shichen put down his teacup, looked at Li Xian and said, "Your Highness, you may not know this, but in the case of the missing woman case that was solved a few days ago, Grand Tutor Chu's grandson was captured on the spot at the Peng residence. It was only because someone exerted some influence that the case was left unsettled." Li Yi and Emingzi didn't look surprised. Instead it was Li Xian who was taken aback. He stood up abruptly and asked, "Something like that happened?" Tseng Shichen nodded. When he saw Li Yi and the princess's expressions, he knew that the Chui family had been too naive the previous time. Even if he didn't say anything he wouldn't be able to hide it from them. Li Xian frowned as he paced around the hall. He muttered, "But this alone isn't enough to topple the Chu family. It won't be a good thing if we anger old man Chu. That old fellow even said something about scholarly bones. What bullsh *t scholarly bones? What if we add a murder case?" Tseng Shichen stood up and said, "Unfortunately, the murder at the Miaoying Pavilion on the night of the Lantern Festival is also related to that young Master Zhu. That murder case had caused an uproar in the capital, but it had still not been solved." Li Xian also had some impression of it. He asked, "What do you mean? Didn't you say that the criminal originally wanted to harm the grandson of Grand Tutor Chu as well? You mean that the case was originally done by that person surnamed Chu?" Li Xian walked up to him and asked, "If that's the case, why hasn't there been any news at all?" "That's because the capital governor, Tseng Shichen, with the tacit approval of Grand Tutor Chu, concealed the truth of the case and framed a fugitive who was on the run. In addition, that woman's older sister felt that there was something fishy about the case and went to the capital governor's yamen to seek justice. To this day she is still imprisoned in the yamen." Li Xian was startled. Confusion and shock appeared on his face. He pointed at him and said, Aren't you Tseng Shichen?" Tseng Shichen straightened his clothes and knelt down in the direction of the eldest princess. In a loud voice he said, "I have sinned." "You." Li Xian pointed at him and was so shocked that he couldn't say anything. In the end he could only choke out, "You traitor, you betrayed me well. So that's why you locked that woman up." Li Yi stood up as well. He looked at him and asked, "Why didn't you tell me about this before?" Zheng Shichen raised his head and slowly said, "The time has not come." Emingzi gazed at him and asked, "Do you know what the crime is?" Zheng Shichen lowered his head and said, "No matter what the crime is, it's still much better than following the Chui family down a dead end." Emingzi looked at him and waved her hand. "Stand up and talk." After listening to Zheng Shichen's words, Her Highness shook her head and said, No wonder he was so radical. Grand Tutor Chu had no other way to protect the Chu family's reputation. Li Xian slammed the table and said angrily, "The Chui family actually used such despicable methods. Why didn't they tell old Chu about this?" Zheng Shichen shook his head and said, "The Chu family can no longer turn back. Whether it was the Chui family's scheme or not, the case was committed by Chu Ping. The Chui family has been uninvolved from the beginning. It's impossible to topple such a powerful family with just one side of the story. Moreover, the capital is deep. The Chui family is not as simple as the crown prince appears to be." Qin He. A trace of doubt appeared on Li Yi's face. His lips moved slightly before he looked at Zheng Shichen and asked, "How is the victim's sister now?" Zheng Shichen said, "In order to prevent the Chui family from silencing her, I have kept her in prison. But this time if she is released she can no longer sound the grievance drum of the capital Yamen. Young Master, Lu Yizhang from the Ministry of Justice is here." Fang came in from outside feeling puzzled. What was going on today? It wasn't a holiday but everyone was running home. Zheng Shichen looked back and said, "I'll go back first. If anything happens I'll get someone to contact you." Li Yi nodded and waved at Fang. He said, "Send Lord Tseng out through the back door." Lord Li. After Lu Yizhang entered he first bowed to Li Yi. Just as he was about to speak, a voice rang in his ear. "Do you only have eyes for Lord Li?" Lu Yizhang was startled. When he saw the two people behind Li Yi, he immediately bowed and said, "Greetings, Your Highness Crown Prince." When he looked up again his mouth opened, but he didn't know if he should speak. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "It's fine. The princess and crown prince are on the same side. Tell me, how's the investigation of the case?" Lu Yizhang nodded and said, "The two missing women have been confirmed to have nothing to do with the Peng family. In the process of investigating the case, I unexpectedly found that the number of missing women in the capital region in the past 2 years has far exceeded the previous years. But the places where they went missing before were relatively scattered, involving more than a dozen counties. The number of missing people in each county is not large, but if you add them up, it is an extremely terrifying number." Li Yi frowned slightly. "There are so many people but there's no clue at all?" Lu Yizhang shook his head and said, "All the clues were inexplicably cut off after extending to the capital. Until now there has been no useful discovery, and there is no direct evidence that these are related to the Chui family." Li Xian looked at him in surprise and asked, "You suspect that the Chui family is also involved in the business of abducting women and selling women?" "I don't know." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Whether or not it has anything to do with the Chui family, we should always try our best to find the two missing women. Otherwise this case will not be over." He turned his head to look at Lu Yizhang and said, "You continue to follow up on this case. Then this subordinate will go back first." Lu Yizhang nodded. After a few steps, a trace of hesitation appeared on his face. He then turned his head and said, "Milord, you can deal with those rotten scholars with all your strength. There is no need to pay attention to the Chui family." Li Xian looked at Lu Yizhang's back as he left, then turned his head and said, "Why do I feel that there is a hidden meaning in his words?" Li Yi looked at him in surprise. "You can hear the hidden meaning in his words?" Without waiting for Li Xian to reply, Fang walked in with a surprised expression. He looked at Li Yi and said, "Young master, someone has come again. It is the old man called Prime Minister Qin who came last time." Li Xian and Emingzi looked at each other. The regent eldest princess was together with the country's traitor, which was rumored to be the talk of the outside world. It was not good for the prime minister to see it. Emingzi looked at him and walked behind a screen with Li Xian. The white-haired old man stepped into the hall and said, "Young people are indeed fearless. The outside world is like a tide of rumors, yet you are still able to sit still." Li Yi stood up and cupped his hands. "Prime Minister Qin, please sit." "All right, I won't be sitting. I've only come here today to bring a message to you." Prime Minister Qin stood at the door and looked at him calmly. He said, "Stick to what you think is right. There are still many discerning people in the court. They will not watch everything you and Her Highness have done for these countries be destroyed in the hands of those with ulterior motives. Although I am old, with my old bones I can still block them for you young people. He said one sentence and only one sentence. After that he turned around and left. It had to be said that Li Yi used to have some misunderstandings about the old man in front of him. However, some things that happened later changed his impression of Prime Minister Qin. Regardless of the Qin family, Prime Minister Qin was an old man who lived a pure life. He was an old man worthy of admiration. He watched Prime Minister Qin's figure disappear and Fang's big face appeared in front of him again. Fang's face showed an extremely puzzled expression. "Young master, what festival is it today?" Li looked at him and asked, "Who is here?" "Old Lu of the county government." Chapter 893. County Magistrate Lu must have had a hard time these days. He must have been under a lot of pressure from all sides. "Have a seat, Lord Lu." After he walked into the hall, Li stretched out his hand and turned to Fang, "Go make a cup of tea for Lord Lu." County Magistrate Lu sat down uneasily. Seeing the teacups on the table, he was slightly stunned. There were some guests just now. Mingzhu and Li Xian didn't come out from behind the screen, and Li didn't explain too much. He looked at County Magistrate Lu and said, "Lord Lu, I've troubled you these days." "Lord Li, please don't say that." County Magistrate Lu hurriedly stood up and cupped his hands, saying, "Without Lord Li there would be no me, Lu Dayo, today. I can still distinguish some things." Li smiled and asked, "Lord Lu, did you encounter some difficulties today? Could it be that someone from above is pressuring you?" County Magistrate Lu smiled carelessly and said, "I'm the magistrate of the capital city, the magistrate of His Majesty and the common people. Other people and other things have nothing to do with me." He looked at Li Yi and asked, "I wonder if Lord Li still remembers this lowly official's friend?" Li Yi was stunned. He thought for a moment and asked, "Lord Lu, are you talking about the friend of the single-eyelid parents?" Lu Dayo nodded and said, "Yes." Obviously, old Lu hadn't completely let go of this matter. Li Yi picked up the teacup and took a sip, indicating him to continue. He looked solemn and asked, "Lord Li, I'll ask you again, is it really impossible for parents with single eyelid to give birth to children with double eyelid?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "I know it may be hard for Lord Lu to accept this matter, but this is indeed the law of nature, which has almost never changed since ancient times." County Magistrate Lu looked at Li Yi with hesitation on his face again. Finally, he made up his mind and said, "To be honest, the person I'm talking about is not my friend." He had used this trick countless times, but he never thought that the person was a friend of County Magistrate Lu. Li put down the teacup, sighed and said, "In fact, I have known it for a long time." This time it was County Magistrate Lu's turn to be shocked. He looked at Li Yi and asked in disbelief, "Lord Li, you also know that the King of Shu is not His Majesty's biological son?" He finally breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. If Lord Li had failed in the confrontation with the Cui family, his fate would not have been any better. Losing his official hat would have been a light punishment, and he might even have been killed. However, this matter was too important and his life could be in danger at every turn. If it wasn't for his trust in Lord Li, unless it was a matter of life and death, he would definitely bury this secret in his heart forever. Unexpectedly, Lord Li had already known about this matter. "What did you say?" Li looked at him in a daze and asked, "Isn't your friend with single eyelids you?" County Magistrate Lu was surprised and said, "How could my friend be me? You mean His Majesty?" Li reached out a hand and motioned him to stop talking. He rubbed the area between his eyebrows and tried to recall something in his mind. The old emperor had single eyelids, which was right. The King of Shu had double eyelids, which he also remembered very clearly. Imperial Concubine Shui, Imperial Concubine Shui. The key was Imperial Concubine Shui. He had only met Imperial Concubine Shui a few times, and most of the time was at night, so he really couldn't remember clearly. Clang. The screen on one side of the lobby fell to the ground, making a heavy sound. Seeing the two people coming out from behind the screen, County Magistrate Lu trembled and his legs suddenly became a little weak. Your Highness?" Li stood up and looked at Mingzhu, who was walking over, and asked, "Do you remember whether Imperial Concubine Shui has double eyelids or single eyelids?" Mingzhu's expression was a little absent-minded. After a moment, her eyes focused again. She looked at him and said slowly, "In the Jing Kingdom, double eyelids are considered beautiful. Imperial concubines are also required to have double eyelids. At that time, the Cui family was powerful in the imperial court. Only they could make an exception to send a woman with single eyelids into the palace and promote her to the position of imperial concubine. Li didn't quite understand those people who would cut their bodies for double eyelids. Single eyelids and double eyelids had their own beauty. He didn't expect that the imperial concubines with single eyelids would be discriminated against in the selection of imperial concubines. It really shouldn't be. However, the key point of the problem now was not the problem of discrimination at all. It was a big problem. How could it be? How could it be? Li Xian shook his head repeatedly. The imperial palace was so strict and the imperial concubine was so noble. How could she do such a thing? Moreover, neither the Cui family nor imperial concubine Cui had any reason to do so. A hint of anger appeared on Li Xian's face as he said, "The Cui family has committed a heinous crime. They have committed such a heinous crime, yet they are still stirring up trouble in the imperial court. I must report this matter to Uncle Huang." "No. No." Li Yi and Emingzu spoke almost at the same time. "You." Li Xian stared at them with his eyes wide open. "Why?" This matter was related to the reputation of the imperial family. It was a crime punishable by extermination. Once it was investigated, not only the Cui family but anyone who had anything to do with the Cui family would not be able to escape. Those people had forced the emperor to summon the king of Shu back to the capital. They had become traitors who wanted to steal the country. It was good enough that they could protect themselves. How could they still be in the mood to clean up the side of the emperor? Emingzi didn't bother to pay attention to him. Li glanced at him and asked, "What do you think His Majesty will do if he hears such news in his current condition?" Li Xian heard this and immediately fell silent. There was no doubt that if Uncle Emperor knew about this, the Cui family would definitely be destroyed. A large number of people in the capital would also die. But what about Uncle Emperor himself? The imperial physician had repeatedly warned that Uncle Emperor's body could no longer be stimulated. If he knew that the Cui family and imperial concubine Cui had done such a thing, the consequences would be unimaginable. "We can't let Uncle Emperor know about this." Li Xian nodded and said, "What about you? If you let the Cui family go, how will you deal with those people?" Li shook his head and said, "You don't have to worry about this matter. I have my own way." Li Xian looked at County Magistrate Lu and suddenly said, "This matter is related to the reputation of the imperial family. Even if we have to investigate it, we can't make it public. The fewer people who know about it, the better." Li Yi sighed and also looked at County Magistrate Lu. He murmured, "Only dead people can keep secrets." County Magistrate Lu's face was pale. He wanted to stand up but he directly collapsed on the chair. When he walked out of the gate of the Li family he still felt a little weak in his legs. He looked at the man beside him and said, "Brother Fang, help me a little?" Fang held his arm and looked him up and down. He said with some disdain, "Old Lu, you should exercise more. Don't keep me guessing. What's your way?" In the hall, Emingzi frowned and looked at him. She said, "Chu Ping is Chu Ping and the Chu family is the Chu family. Even if we expose these two cases, we may not be able to shake the Chu family. Don't underestimate the Chu family's position in the hearts of the officials and people. Whether we can shake them or not depends on our skills." Li walked out of the door and said, "But before that, I want to see Wengu of the Jing Kingdom." Chapter 894. The capital of the Jing Kingdom was the most prosperous and affluent place in the Jing Kingdom. It was also the holy land in the hearts of scholars in the Jing Kingdom. There were many wealthy families and great scholars here. Countless scholars in the Jing Kingdom flocked to this place. Compared to the places outside the capital region, there were undoubtedly more opportunities here. In the private garden of a famous scholar in the capital, dozens of young scholars were scattered around the garden in groups of 3 to 5, chatting and laughing with each other. Somewhere, a young man in green frowned and said, "No matter how I look at it, Lord Li doesn't look like a treacherous official. Think about it, he has done so much for our Jing Kingdom in the past few years. Even you and I have benefited a lot from him. How did he become a treacherous official? He has repeatedly tried to stop the King of Shu from entering the capital and obstructed His Majesty from assigning the position of the Eastern Palace. He must have some kind of wild ambition." The eyes of the person beside him flashed and he shook his head. "You don't even trust the Grand Tutor and the great scholars?" Hearing this, the young scholar's face quickly showed hesitation. In other places in the garden, people's conversations were also limited to the matter of purging the emperor's side that had caused an uproar. The King of Shu is the legitimate crown prince. It is in line with the ancestral system and ethical principles. Although the eldest princess is as talented as a man, she is a woman after all. It is not a solution to go on like this. He thinks that he can interfere with the selection of the crown prince by relying on His Majesty's favor. If he isn't a treacherous official, what is? This kind of treacherous official usually doesn't have a good ending. In a pavilion in the garden, two old men were sitting opposite each other and playing chess. After the old man with the white piece put down a piece, he said, "Brother Chu has never cared about these court affairs. Why is he so radical this time? Strange, strange." The old man with the black piece picked up a piece and thought for a moment before putting it down. He said, "Not to mention that Brother Chu is a little strange, the position of the Eastern Palace should not be left empty. It is the right way for the eldest prince to enter the Eastern Palace. How can the court affairs be controlled by a woman for so long? Pa." The old man holding the white chess piece suddenly put down the chess piece and said angrily, "Women taking over the government? Her Majesty's move is really stupid. The Women's Union, the Women's College, look at what she has done. What a mess. A few days ago I visited an old friend. That old friend's granddaughter actually told me that the teachers of the Women's College told them that it was impossible for parents with single eyelids to have children with double eyelids. That's utter nonsense. His Majesty and Imperial Consort Shui both have single eyelids. I've seen the King of Shu with my own eyes. He clearly has double eyelids." His tone was resentful. "When I'm done with this part, I'll definitely submit a memorial to the Women's College. Let's focus on the matter at hand first." However, the elder did not pay much attention to what he said. After placing down another black chess piece, he smiled and said, "Brother Zhao, you've lost. Although the Zheng family's mansion is big, it's not a good idea for you to live here all the time." Li looked at drunken Mo and asked, "Why don't you just move over? Whenever you miss this place you can come back and stay for a few days." She shook her head and said, "I won't leave Sister Ruoqing behind." Li comforted her, "Who said you two should separate? When the time comes, Ruoqing will move over together and you two can still live together." "That's nothing. Even if you agree, Sister Ruoqing won't?" She tilted her head and looked at Ruoqing. "Don't you think so, Sister Ruoqing?" Wan Ruoqing just smiled and did not answer. Li looked at her and said, "All right, but the old madam has been talking about you for a long time. Let's pick a time and I'll take you to see her." "Ah, the old madam of the Li family?" Her expression immediately became a little flustered. Li nodded and said, "If you don't go, I'll have to bring the old madam to see you." "This matter?" She stood up, and the panic and nervousness on her face were even more obvious. She stammered, I haven't brushed my teeth today." Seeing her run into the room in a panic, Li could only shake his head. He understood her concerns, and it was not good to force her on such a matter. After she left, the smile on Ruoqing's face gradually faded. She looked at him with some worry and said, "I've heard the rumors outside. Mrs. Chen also asked me to bring you a message. Don't have a direct conflict with those people. Has the matter really reached such a serious point? Don't worry, it's just a small trouble. It will be solved soon." Li stood up and looked at the closed door. He estimated that it would take a long time for drunken Mo to brush her teeth this time. After saying goodbye to Xiao Cui, he looked at Wan Ruoqing and said, "Let's go out for a walk." It was early May and the weather was not very hot. Out of the Zheng mansion, Wan Ruoqing comforted him. Drunken Mo should still be a little worried. "I've been persuading her these days. I think after a few days she will agree to move over." Li Yi tilted his head, looked at her and asked, "What about you?" "Me." Wan Ruoqing was stunned and said, "After all, I've lived here for a long time. I'm still used to Willow Lane. I'll probably move back there. The house is too big and it's always a little lonely with only a few people living there." "It won't be lonely if there are more people." When walking to the door of the brothel, Li Yi smiled and said, "You go in first. I have something to do." "In a moment." "Forget it, let's talk about it later." Wan Ruoqing looked at him and asked, "Will you come back in a moment?" "Depends." Li Yi wanted to say that he would see how it went. Seeing her look at him, he swallowed the words that were in his throat and nodded. "Come here." On the street, the sloppy old man limped behind him, but his speed was not slow. He shook his head and said, "When you're young, you do what you think in your heart. It's better to regret now than to lament when you're old." Li Yi looked at his legs and said, "You go to second uncle every day but you can't beat him. Why bother? What do young people know?" The sloppy old man curled his lips disdainfully and said, "If I meet Taoist nun again now, I can let her use one hand." Li Yi stopped before the guru finished bragging because they had arrived at the Chu family. The gatekeeper of the Chu family was very polite. When he saw the young man and the old man, he asked them very politely if they had an invitation. When he learned that they did not, he also politely told them that the Grand Tutor was meeting some old friends today and would not see any guests. If they did not have an invitation, they should come back another day. Li Yi smiled and said, "Please inform them that I'm here to visit the Grand Tutor. If the Grand Tutor really doesn't want to see us, we can leave." The gatekeeper saw that the young man in front of him was extraordinary. Although the old man behind him was not very agile, his eyes were very scary. He could not figure out their identity and said, "Wait a minute, I'll go inform them. However, it's not certain whether the Grand Tutor will see you or not." Ningchen. He murmured the name and quickly ran in. Somewhere in the capital, two figures walked out of a brothel. Hearing the gossip of the people around them, the middle-aged man turned his head and asked the man beside him, "Some people in the capital say that Sir Li is a pillar of the court, and some say that he is a traitor. What do you think?" "I don't know. I'm not very familiar with Sir Li." The man beside him shook his head, thought for a moment and said, "However, I still think that Sir Li has been wronged." The middle-aged man looked at the crowd and murmured, "Since he has been wronged, why doesn't he respond to the rumors in the capital and the fights in the court?" Wuxia sighed and said, "Who knows? Don't worry." The middle-aged man patted him on the shoulder and said with a smile, "Sir Li is a hero of his generation. These clowns won't last long in front of him. We have to believe in him." Chapter 895. The Chu Family. In the main hall, other than Grand Tutor Chu, there were several elders of similar ages. They all wore loose Confucian robes and had righteous expressions. Their bearing was extraordinary, and they seemed to have a noble character. A thin elder shook his head and said, "It's a pity. Although Grand Tutor Wang resigned long ago and the Wang family has always kept a low profile, if he was willing to stand out, the matter would not have been dragged out to this day." Another elder with a serious expression sighed and said, "Grand Tutor Wang, I once personally went to invite him, but he tactfully refused. He said that he was old and did not care about the affairs of the court." His words revealed his admiration for that sycophant. Back then, when the envoy of the Qi kingdom caused havoc in the capital, no one in the vast capital dared to fight. Grand Tutor Wang dragged his sick body to court and was persuaded by everyone. You all know what happened next. It's no wonder he was so impressed. It's fine if Grand Tutor Wang doesn't help either side, but isn't this Qin Wen Brother Chu's disciple? This time he actually joined forces with many important officials in the court to speak up for that sycophant. If not for that, why didn't the officials respond as soon as Brother Chu spoke? The matter has been dragged on for so long. It's not just the officials. I'm afraid that even the common people will have to put in more effort. As they drank tea and discussed, a servant of the Chu family walked in from outside. He walked to Grand Tutor Chu's side and whispered a few words. "Ningchen?" Grand Tutor Chu frowned slightly. He had no impression of this person at all. When the gatekeeper saw this, he felt a wave of regret. He hurriedly said, "I'll send them away immediately." "Wait." He quickly walked out of the door and a voice came from behind him. Grand Tutor Chu looked at him and asked, "You said that he is a young man about the same age as Ping and that he is handsome and has an extraordinary bearing?" The gatekeeper immediately nodded. "He is handsome and much more handsome than young master." "Ning Chen, sycophant." Grand Tutor Chu murmured. A hint of doubt appeared on his face as he said in a low voice, "Let him in." At the entrance of the Chu family, the gatekeeper ran over and wiped the sweat off his forehead. He respectfully said to Li Yi, "Young master, please come in." Compared to the other rich and powerful families that Li Yi had seen, the Chu residence wasn't very big. In fact, it could even be said to be on the small side. Perhaps it was also because the Chu clan didn't have many descendants, and the two generations of the clan only had one son. Too large of a residence couldn't be used and it would seem deserted. Led by the servant, they did not pass through the main residence, but took a small path to the left. Not long after, they arrived at a small garden. A figure dressed in a gray Confucian robe stood with his hands clasped behind his back. Li Yi wasn't sure if it was an illusion, but he felt that the body of this royal tutor was much hunchier than the last two times he saw him. The old man turned his head and asked calmly, "This old man has always been curious. When you saw me on the street that day, why did you hide?" At this moment, Li Yi realized that not only was his back hunched, but his complexion was also much older than before. It was as if he had aged 10 years in an instant. "I was afraid that you would blackmail me," Li Yi said honestly. "Unfortunately, I couldn't escape in the end." The two of them had been at loggerheads in the court that day, but when they met again, there was not the slightest atmosphere. The old man looked at him with a sharp gaze and asked, "You repeatedly prevented the eldest imperial son from entering the capital. Do you think that this old man has wronged you?" Li smiled and said, "As for the reason, the royal tutor naturally understands." "Actually, I can understand the royal tutor." Li gazed at the neatly trimmed flower garden to the side and slowly said, "The Chu clan has been a clean stream among the scholars of the Jing kingdom for many generations. They represent righteousness and righteousness. A mere sycophant naturally cannot compare to the Chu clan's century-old reputation." Royal tutor Chu's expression was calm, but his fists, which were hidden in his sleeves, were tightly clenched. His veins were bulging. "I know that Cui Qingming used some shameful methods to get hold of the Chu clan's weakness." Li shook his head and continued, "Your grandson deserves it, but the Chu clan should not be implicated. Even if the Cui clan exposed those scandals, it will not shake the Chu clan's foundation. Although it will inevitably damage the Chu clan's reputation, it will not be difficult to make up for it in the future." He gazed at royal tutor Chu again. "What is difficult is the royal tutor's choice." Royal tutor Chu stared at him. A moment later, he unclenched his fists and said, "All of this is just your one-sided statement. There is no stain on the Chu clan and there is no need to make up for it." Li met his gaze for a long time before sighing. He cupped his fists and said, "Since that's the case, royal tutor, this sycophant bids farewell." Just as he was about to walk out of the garden, he stopped and turned back to ask, "Was it worth it?" This time he did not receive any response from the old man. When he walked out of the Chu household, the unkempt old man saw that his expression was relaxed. There was no hesitation or apprehension from before. He asked in surprise, "What, did you succeed?" Li nodded, "It's done." The unkempt old man was somewhat disappointed along the way. He thought he could watch a great show, but from the looks of it there wasn't much hope. When he arrived at the entrance of the brothel, he asked again, "How long will I be staying inside today?" "I'll go out for a walk." "I'm not going back today." Li waved his hand. "You can walk as long as you want. Just let me know at home before nightfall." "You're not going back." The unkempt old man looked at him in surprise and asked, "Are you sure?" Li nodded and stepped into the brothel. Recently there hadn't been many exciting shows at the brothel. The customers were already beginning to complain. It was time to add something new. He habitually glanced at the small building in front of him and happened to meet a gaze from the window of the loft. Li was startled for a moment, then he smiled and waved his hand towards that direction, then walked over quickly. "He's not coming back tonight?" "The Li family." Mississippi Lu frowned. "Where is he?" The unkempt old man shrugged. "A place to watch a show." Mississippi Lu waved her sleeves. "Take me there." Rui grabbed her arm and shook her head. "My husband said before he went out this morning that he had something important to do today. He might not come back tonight." "What are you going to do?" "I'm not going to look for him." Mississippi Lu shook her head and said, I'm going to watch a show." In the room above the loft of the brothel. When Li saw her watching writing, she frowned slightly and seemed to be in pain. He asked in confusion, "What's wrong?" She put down the pen and looked at her fingers. She shook her head and said, "Maybe I've held the pen for too long these 2 days. There are blisters?" Li saw that there was a blister on her fingers. He frowned and said, "Forget it. Don't write any more. When I finish writing this chapter, you can tell me how to arrange it and I'll write it down." Li put down the pen and said, "I'll help you pop the blister first. You can rest for a while." He took out a sterilized needle. These things were always available here. He held her hand and poked a hole in the blister. He squeezed out the liquid inside but didn't completely pop it. He looked up and asked, "Does it hurt?" "No." Ruoqing smiled and shook her head. Li nodded and said, "The wound needs to be disinfected. I'll apply some alcohol on it now. Might hurt a little. Just bear with it." Even though she was mentally prepared, when he applied the alcohol, she couldn't help but let out a suppressed cry of pain when she suddenly felt the stinging pain. "It hurts. Just bear with it." Mississippi Lu stood outside the door with a livid face. When she heard the woman's suppressed voice, she finally couldn't help but push the door open and enter. "Don't touch water these days and don't write." Li put down the things in his hands and looked at her to remind her. Then he turned to look at Mississippi Lu and asked in surprise, "Rui, why are you here?" Mississippi Lu glanced around the room and then looked at Li. She said lightly, "I'm here to ask you to go home for dinner." Chapter 896. Women were really strange. She said that she wanted to invite him back for a meal, but she left by herself. It was likely that the sloppy elder's girlish heart had run wild and he had forgotten to bring a message back. Time was tight to begin with, so there was no need to waste any more time. Li Yi held a cold steamed bun in his mouth and wrote as he ate. He turned to Wan Ruoqing and said, "If you haven't eaten, go out and eat something first. I still need a while to finish." Wan Ruoqing nodded and went out. When she came back again, she was holding a food box in her hand. She looked at Li Yi and shook her head. "You can't just eat steamed buns. I bought some porridge. Have some." Li Yi nodded and said, "Leave it there first. I'll eat it later." He wasn't too hungry. Of course, the most important thing was to hurry up. After leaving the Chu family today, there was no turning back. There was no need to hold back against an enemy. After writing a few words, a gentle voice sounded in his ear. "Open your mouth." Li Yi paused and looked back at her. This scene was so familiar. He subconsciously opened his mouth and she gently placed the spoon in. An interesting play not only needed a brilliant script, but the stage layout, the actors' acting skills, as well as their expressions and lines were all very important. All he could do was the first step. The rest of the more detailed and tedious matters had to be left to professionals like her. After he wrote the first chapter, he discussed these matters with her for more than 2 hours. They discussed from day to night. Li Yi saw the fatigue between her brows and said, "I'll write the next chapter. Rest for a while." Wan Ruoqing nodded and didn't refuse. She had been busy until late last night, so she was actually a little sleepy. She still had to discuss the second chapter later, so it was beneficial to take a short rest now. She leaned over the small table by the bed and looked at the flickering candlelight before slowly closing her eyes. Pah! The oil lamp gave off a spark and let out a soft sound. When she slowly opened her eyes, she found that she was lying on the bed, covered with a thin layer of quilt. She got up from the bed and looked in a certain direction subconsciously. There was no one at the table. Has he gone back? The paper spread out on the table should be the finished script. She picked it up and looked at it. It was indeed finished. It was dark outside the window. It was already very late. After tomorrow she would be busy again and even busier than before. In order to ensure enough energy, she had to rest early even though she wasn't sleepy. She took off her coat and only wore a doo-doo. She put it on the cabinet and sat on the bed. Just as she was about to take off her shoes and socks, the door was pushed open from the outside. Usually only she and Yu Zhu lived in this small building, so the door didn't need to be locked from the inside. She subconsciously thought that it was Xiao Zhu who came in, but when she looked up, her expression froze. "You're awake. I was afraid that you would be hungry at night, so I cooked a bowl of noodles for you." Li Yi walked in with a tray and closed the door with his foot. When he heard her explanation, he was also stunned. After a long time, he asked tentatively, "Why don't you put on your clothes first?" "I thought you had left." Wan Ruoqing put on her clothes, her cheeks still red. "Well, it ended a little earlier than expected. I'll leave right away." Li Yi put down the tray and couldn't help but turn his head to look at her. It was really strange. The new style of underwear had become completely popular in the capital, but whether it was Mississippi Lu, Zuamo, or Ruoqing, they all had a special fondness for doo-doo. It really didn't make sense. "This? Did you cook it?" Wan Ruoqing looked at the fragrant noodles on the table. In addition to a few green decorations on top of the noodles, there was also a poached egg. She turned to look at him and asked, "There is no kitchen here. I went outside deliberately." Li Yi looked at her, shook his head and said, "Although it's not good to eat so late, it's my birthday after all. I still have to eat longevity noodles." Wan Ruoqing looked at him and said in a daze, "Birthday?" Li Yi asked helplessly, "Your birthday is only half a month later than Zuamo's. Don't tell me you've forgotten it yourself?" Her face was a little red. She sat at the table and ate the noodles. Li Yi walked over and opened the window. In the distant night sky, the first light bloomed. Then there were 2, 10, 100 and countless. Wan Ruoqing held her chopsticks and looked out of the window absent-mindedly. The fireworks illuminated half of the sky. On the street not far from the window, there were countless exclamations. From her direction, he stood at the place where the fireworks were the most brilliant, smiling and waving at her. Li didn't stay out all night. If he really had a long talk with Ruoqing all night, it was very likely that Mississippi Lu would come over in the middle of the night to ask him to go back for dinner. What's more, in the next few days Ruoqing would be very busy and needed enough time to rest. At the very least, it was not good for a man and a woman to be alone in a room. If it was spread out, it would ruin the girl's reputation. If she couldn't get married in the future, it would be great. Even so, when he returned home, it was after midnight. There was no light in the whole house. Rui and the child should have fallen asleep long ago. He groped his way to the study, but he didn't turn on the light. He walked to the bed, lay down, and slept in his clothes. When he stretched out his hand to pull the quilt, his palm touched a very soft place. He subconsciously squeezed it, and a cold voice seemed to ring in his ear. "Take your hand away." It didn't seem like it, but it was. Li turned over and got out of bed. Looking at Mississippi Lu, who sat up on the bed, he said in surprise, "Why are you sleeping here?" When he asked this question, he realized that he had asked a nonsense question. Recently, Mississippi Lu had abandoned martial arts for literature. She studied hard every day and even occupied his study. Most of the time she read until late at night. It was not a difficult thing to understand that she slept here at night. A tiger's butt should not be touched, let alone a tigress butt. Li hid the hand behind his back and took a few steps back, always alert for sword light beside the bed. When he retreated to the door, he saw that there was no movement beside the bed. He thought for a while and asked again, "If I go to sleep now, I will definitely disturb the child. The guest room is not cleaned. If you sleep here, where should I sleep? Your room?" Finally, there was some movement beside the bed. Mississippi Lu got out of bed. Although Li could feel two eyes in the dark, which made him feel guilty, Mississippi Lu didn't mention what had happened just now. She walked straight past him and left the study. He closed the door and went back to the bed to lie down. A familiar light fragrance lingered in his nose. After being stunned for a while, he murmured, "Is there a difference?" Since the capital entered summer, the weather became hot and dry, and the situation was also restless. In the court, the two forces led by Grand Tutor Chu and Prime Minister Qin had new changes every day. The common people were also affected a lot. Rumors and rumors were everywhere. However, County Marquis Li, who was at the heart of the struggle, was as still as a mountain from beginning to end. He didn't make any response or reaction to it, which made everyone puzzled. Of course, although this matter affected the hearts of the common people, the affairs of the court and the debate between loyalty and treachery were too far away from them. It was not an easy choice to believe in the famous Grand Tutor Chu or Lord Li, who had done a lot of good things for the common people. Compared with this matter, the new play that had been promoted in the brothel since a few days ago was obviously much closer to them. That new play had a trial screening in only one brothel in the capital today. Even if the brothel was already full of people, the guests who didn't buy tickets in advance could only stand outside the door and sigh. The spectators who were lucky enough to buy tickets were naturally complacent. In the dark theater, only the lights around the stage were on. They didn't wait long. The stage curtain was opened, and a faintly discernible voice floated into their ears. "Flowers will bloom again, but people will never be young again. There is no need to be rich and powerful. Peace and happiness are immortals." The curtain was completely opened, and an old woman in cotton clothes with a bent body appeared on the stage. The old woman took a few steps forward and introduced, "I'm Granny Kai from Chuzhou City. We are the family of 3. Unfortunately, my husband has passed away and he only has one child who is 8 years older than me. I have 2 children and my family is quite rich. Here is Scholar Do." The ordinary opening was the original routine of a common play, but because of the overwhelming promotion in the brothel at this moment, people were still looking forward to the play. Chapter 897. At the beginning of the play there was a cliffhanger. Do Tianzhang, a shiotsai in Chuzhou City, owed Granny Kai 40 taels of silver, so he had to sell his 7-year-old daughter Do Yi to Granny Kai as a child bride. Do Tianzhang received 10 taels of silver from Granny Kai for traveling expenses, and then went to the capital city to take the exam. There were not many highlights in this cliffhanger, but the actors on the stage were excellent, and the plot was smooth. It was quite enjoyable to watch, so the audience was not disappointed. That little Duanyun is quite good at acting at such a young age. You don't know. They have been trained in this field since they were young. Since they can go on the stage, you can't find any fault with them. That's true. But since this play is called Do Yi's Injustice, I don't know what the injustice is. What's the hurry? It's just the beginning. Let's keep watching. Because of the popularity of the Justice Bao series, people were very fond of this kind of drama. Who wouldn't like to redress the grievances of the people? Soon they found out why Do Yi had been wronged. The Kai family moved, Do Yi's husband died early and she and her mother-in-law depended on each other. Then they were framed by evil people and happened to meet a corrupt official. Doi had no choice but to confess and admit the crime in order to save her mother-in-law from being tortured. She was sentenced to death and sent to the execution ground. According to the usual practice of the play, this was the most exciting part of the play. This corrupt official deserves to die. This daughter-in-law is so filial. She is willing to bear the injustice in order to save her mother-in-law. Where is Lord Bao? Why isn't he here? Quickly reverse the verdict for Doi. Have you ever seen a play before? How could Lord Bao show up at this time? It was Guard Zhan who descended from the sky and shouted, "Spare her life." Finally, someone couldn't help but remind them. Brothers, are you two acting? Really? Isn't that Justice Bao? Back to the stage. Doi had been sent to the execution ground. Two voices rang in the audience's ears, like a huge bell. Breaking the law for no reason, not being on guard against being punished by the Constitution, the cry was earth-shattering. In an instant, wandering souls went to the Sanluo temple. How could they not blame the heaven and earth? Good people suffer poverty and have a shorter life, while evil people enjoy wealth and have a longer life. Heaven and earth. He acted as if he was afraid of the strong and bullied the weak, but it turned out that this was also how he pushed the boat with the current. You're the earth, yet you can't tell good from bad. Heaven, you are wrong to judge the virtuous and foolish to be heaven. As soon as these two sentences were spoken, everyone's hearts immediately sank. They seemed to feel that the injustice Doi had suffered had reached the point where even heaven and earth resented her. At this time the executioner said, "Death is at hand, what else do you have to say?" Doi said, "I want a clean banquet. When I Doi stand up I want Jianghu 2 white ropes to hang on the spear. If I Doi am really wronged my head will fall wherever the knife passes. My hot blood will not stain the ground, it will all fly to the white silk. Now is the hottest time of the year. If Doi is really wronged after she dies, 3 feet of auspicious snow will fall from the sky and cover her corpse. I Doi died a wrong death. From now on Chuzhou City will suffer from drought for 3 years. Doi's voice was sorrowful as she made 3 wishes in a row. Blood stains the white silk, blood splatters in June, 3 years of drought. The crowd was silent and no one was talking anymore. The executioner shouted angrily, "The time has come, execute her." In the middle of the stage the executioner swung the knife down, and Doi fell to the ground. Her blood sprayed into the air and splashed on the white silk. At this moment, more than half of the people in the audience couldn't help but stand up. Blood stains on the white silk? It was indeed blood stains on the white silk. Doi's first wish had come true. On the stage, the executioner quietly made a hand gesture, and a board rose up from where a piece of the stage was missing, and the stage became seamless again. Right at this moment, someone below suddenly shivered and murmured, "Why do I feel that the surroundings are chilly?" Someone couldn't help but wrap his arms around himself. Although the weather was hot, there were ice mirrors everywhere. Even if it wasn't hot, it wouldn't be cold. Someone suddenly felt a chill in his nose and he couldn't help but touch his nose, only to find that it was wet. When he raised his head, he discovered that there were actually white snowflakes falling from the sky. Is it snowing? How is that possible? It's summer now and we are in a brothel. Above everyone's heads on the thick beam, someone was standing there, gently shaking the bamboo basket in his hand, and extremely fine ice shards were scattered down from above. When everyone looked back to the stage, Doi's body had already been buried under the snow. As the tragic music became clearer, the lines of the opera surfaced in everyone's mind. I don't want half a star of blood spilled in the mortal world, it's all in the air. If I have a heart full of resentment, I will feel the 6 ice flowers roll like a brocade, so that my body won't be revealed. I Doi died an unjust death. From now on Chuzhou City will suffer a drought for 3 years. This time there was no bodyguard Zhan, no Justice Bao, and Doi was executed. The vows she made before her death were fulfilled one by one. Blood splashed on the white silk and snow fell in June. According to common sense this was impossible. Even heaven and earth were touched by her grievances, and her wish was fulfilled. 3 years later, Doi's father, Do Tianzhong, would reverse the verdict for her and clear her name. However, at this moment the atmosphere in the brothel was getting out of control. On the stage, the performers who were about to start their performance had no choice but to stop. Below the stage many people stared at the stage in a daze, and many had tears streaming down their cheeks. Doi was unfortunate and she was miserable. However, only a few of those who could sit and watch the show were from rich families. Their status was not much higher than Dou-Yi's, and they were also bullied by all kinds of evil forces. This was Dou-Yi's injustice, and it was also their injustice. The show could no longer go on, so the manager of the brothel announced that the last twist of Dou-Yi's injustice would be postponed. When the audience walked out of the brothel, they felt that the scorching sun was not as hot as it used to be. Instead, they felt a chill down their spines. They were sweating, but it was cold sweat. What's wrong with you guys? Is the show over? Was it good? What's going on? Say something. The audience couldn't get any useful information from the people who had already walked out of the brothel. By then, the second show was about to begin, so they didn't have time to ask the audience questions. After a long time, the second group of people walked out of the brothel. An unjust case shocked the world, and snow fell in June. In just a few days, the play known as The Greatest Injustice of All Time had spread across the capital. All the other shows in the dozens of brothels in the capital had temporarily stopped, and only Dou-Yi's injustice was being rehearsed in every brothel. In the county government of the capital, County Magistrate Liu looked at the thick stack of papers in front of him and suddenly felt dizzy. He slumped in his chair and murmured, "How can there be so many unjust cases in the capital, right under the feet of the emperor?" Below, Arrestor Zhao showed a wry smile and said, "Lord Liu, don't complain. These days it's the same everywhere in the county government. Chuzhou is our neighbor. The governor of Chuzhou and the magistrate of Shanyang County have been scolded badly. The people of the capital are filled with righteous indignation. Some people are even kneeling at the gate of the palace, begging the princess to investigate the case thoroughly and prove Dou-Yi's innocence. This is just a play." County Magistrate Liu slammed the table angrily and said loudly, "But there are so many unjust cases, how can I investigate? Sir, this is really nothing. Think about it this way. In the play, if it wasn't the magistrate of Shanyang County, but the magistrate of the capital..." "Shut up." County Magistrate Liu's face turned pale, and his whole body quivered. He suddenly bounced up from the chair and shouted, "Beat the drum, raise the court, I'm going to break 10 today." On the street in the capital, a man looked at the woman next to him and said pitifully, "My wife, believe me, I really lost my purse. I didn't keep a vixen outside." The woman said angrily with a face full of disbelief, "How dare you deny it? You have the smell of her perfume on you, do you think I can't smell it?" The man helplessly took out a bottle of perfume from his pocket and said, "This is the birthday gift I bought for you with the money I saved for a year," he said with a sad face. "How dare you suspect me of keeping a vixen outside? I am more innocent than Dou-Yi." "What? You have a secret stash of money?" At the corner of the street, a woman chased after an 8 or 9-year-old child and said angrily, "You didn't go to school today, did you go to the brothel?" The child stopped and shook his head. "I didn't." "You are wrongly accusing me." The woman grabbed his arm. "How dare you lie to me? The teacher in school told me everything." "I really didn't." The child shook his head violently and said loudly, "Mother, you are wrongly accusing me. If I die of being wrongly accused, I will make my blood splash on the brothel, snow in June, and drought for 3 years in the capital." "You are still denying it." The woman took off his pants on the street and slapped him a few times, saying as she slapped him, "I will make your blood splash on the brothel, snow in June, and drought for 3 years. Recently, there was a wind of crying injustice in the capital. Everyone, regardless of gender or age, called themselves Dou-Yi. When the brothel performed for free, there were even no pedestrians on the usually crowded streets. In addition, the government offices in each county were blocked by the people who appealed every day. The situation did not improve until the government suppressed several groups of troublemakers with a tough attitude. At this time, in front of the government office of the Ministry of Justice, a weak woman walked out of the crowd. After beating the big drum at the entrance of the government office, she knelt in front of the door and cried out in a sad voice, "Sir, I am wrongly accused." Chapter 898. Sir, I've been wronged. The woman knelt in front of the Ministry of Justice. Her voice was extremely sorrowful, as if she had a great grievance in her heart that she had nowhere to cry about. It drew the sidelong glances of passers-by. Recently, the common people had been filing complaints. It wasn't just the yamen of the various counties, but also the yamen of the capital, the Imperial Censorate, the Ministry of Justice, and even the Ministry of Revenue, Ministry of Rights, and Ministry of Works. As long as it was a yamen, it was unavoidable. After all, the number of yamens was limited and there were many people. It was impossible for them all to gather together. Even if all the yamens in Jianghu were taken into account, there wouldn't be enough. This kind of situation had greatly hindered the normal operation of the yamen. Thus, the eldest princess quickly made an order based on the feelings of the people and the actual situation in Jianghu. Anyone who took the opportunity to purposely cause trouble and block the yamen would be severely punished as a warning to others. If there were truly any grievances, they should be filed in an orderly manner. The relevant yamen would deal with them one by one according to the urgency and severity of the case. Any grievances had to be tried and any cases had to be reversed. The bottom line of the law was strictly observed, and the people were given a clear sky. With the eldest princess order, the vigorous anti-corruption cases among the people were temporarily eased. It didn't disappear. Instead, it went from disorder to order. Countless eyes were fixed on the various yamens in Jianghu. At this critical juncture, even the usually unbridled playboys in Jianghu were tightly restrained by their families. They were terrified that they would cause trouble and become targets in everyone's eyes. Even a small matter would be infinitely magnified to a point where their families couldn't bear it. The Ministry of Justice usually dealt with serious cases. Unless the emperor designated it, the main hall of the Ministry of Justice was usually closed, and complaints of grievances were not allowed in front of the Ministry of Justice. However, this time was different. Each county yamen was about to go crazy, and the Ministry of Justice couldn't be idle either. A bailiff had already come out from inside and kindly helped the woman up from the ground. He kindly asked her what grievances she had suffered and if she had a piece of paper. If she didn't, she could have a bailiff from the Ministry of Justice write one for free. From beginning to end, there wasn't much impatience on their faces. So many people were watching on the street. If one place wasn't handled well, the Ministry of Justice's reputation would be ruined. This was a special time. If something went wrong at this time, it would be strange if the minister didn't skin them alive. Soon, the woman was helped into the hall by a Ministry of Justice runner. Among the onlookers on the street, someone shook his head and said, "In terms of how they treat the common people, the officials of the Ministry of Justice are still the best. Unlike the governor's mansion. I heard that some time ago someone went to the yamen to seek justice, but the people of the yamen didn't care. They even locked the person up for disturbing the yamen. Compared to the Ministry of Justice, the difference is obvious." That's right. As soon as he finished speaking, someone else chimed in. Unfortunately, I was also present at that time. It is said that the young lady's younger sister died. This is a murder case. The people at the capital's magistrate's office are really too careless. I heard that the young lady has been arrested several times. What is the capital magistrate worried about? Another person interrupted. The one who went in just now seems to be the young lady. Why is she in the Ministry of Justice this time? There's such a thing? Someone's face was filled with anger as he quickly walked towards the entrance of the Ministry of Justice. If that's the case, I might have to take a look at this case. I'm going too. Let's go together. At the entrance of the Ministry of Justice, the excited crowd was stopped by the yamen officials. However, they didn't stop them for long. After verifying their identities, someone specially led them in. Based on the principle of fairness and openness, when the Ministry of Justice was conducting a case, the common people were allowed to listen in. The Ministry of Justice claimed that there were laws to abide by, that the law was enforced strictly, and that those who violated the law would be punished. For some cases, the process of handling the case was completely transparent, which won many people's hearts. Of course, in order not to disturb the order of the case, the number of people listening in was still limited to 50. However, although most people couldn't see it with their own eyes, the various details of the case would be passed on through the mouths of these 50 people. In a short period of time, the news would spread throughout the entire capital. In the court, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Lu Yi, patted the gavel and asked, "Who are you? Where do you live? What are your grievances? Tell me slowly." The woman stood in the court and said softly, "Your Excellency, my name is Lin Qin. I live near the city gate of the capital. My younger sister is 16 years old. Her maiden name is Lin Shuangshuang. She used to be a musician at the Miaoying Pavilion. On the night of the 15th of the first month, today's court will be held by Lu Qingtian. This lady is really lucky this time. Every case handled by Lu Qingtian has been solved by him." Not necessarily. It's very likely that the capital governor's residence will be involved in this case. However, I still believe in Lu Qingtian. In the past few years, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Lu Yi, had handled countless cases. No matter how well hidden the criminal was, there was no place for him to hide. This was because he often helped the people and solved ordinary cases. He was deeply loved and respected by the people of the capital. People gave him the nickname of Lu Qingtian. Lu Qingtian had the meaning of the Great Lord of Justice. It also overlapped with the fictional image of Justice Bao in the opera. This was the highest praise the people of the capital had for him. Inside the court, when the woman was complaining about her grievances, people outside the court had already understood. So this woman is Miss Shuangshuang's sister. Miss Shuangshuang's zither skills were unparalleled. It's a pity that she died young. That 100 birds pay homage to the phoenix will never be heard again. What a pity, what a pity! Didn't the capital governor's office say that it was the work of a criminal from the imperial court? Bullshit capital governor's office. One of the people who had been paying attention to the situation inside the court was so angry that his chest heaved up and down. He angrily said, "Listen, this lady only wanted to see Miss Shuangshuang's body, but the capital governor's office found a reason to arrest her. Later on, they used a few more reasons to lock her up in prison for almost half a year. If there's nothing fishy going on, I won't believe it even if I beat you to death." At this time, as the woman in the court explained, the case gradually became clear. According to the explanation given by the capital governor's office, on the night of the Upper Yuan dynasty, a criminal from the imperial court hid in the Fine Sound Pavilion. After using extremely cruel methods to kill Miss Shuangshuang, he tried to harm the young master of the Chu family but failed. Then he jumped out of the window and escaped. Even now, although the wanted poster had been posted everywhere, the criminal had not been arrested. If it weren't for the lady standing in the court, perhaps the case would have passed with the passage of time and be forgotten by people. However, her experience and the actions of the capital governor's office added many points of doubt to the case. How did Miss Shuangshuang die? How did the criminal escape the heavy pursuit of the government without leaving a single trace? What role did the capital governor's office play in this case? The entire case suddenly became complicated and confusing. Everyone said that Doi was wronged. This lady's younger sister had died a dubious death. She went to the government to seek redress and was imprisoned for half a year. She had no place to seek redress for her grievances, so how could she not be wronged? Once the case broke out, it quickly attracted the attention of the people of the capital. It also made the Ministry of Justice pay great attention to it. The relevant witnesses of the Fine Sound Pavilion had already been brought to the Ministry of Justice and were heavily protected. The Ministry of Justice had also sent in a request to pull out all the files related to the case from the capital governor's office and reinvestigate the case. They wanted to prove the innocence of the deceased and give the people who were paying attention to the case an explanation. Under these circumstances, Doi's injustice continued to be performed in various brothels in the capital. Every day, countless benefit performances were held. In a certain brothel, Fang looked at Li Yi and said with some heartache, "Young master, this stage, this scene, this effect, so much ice and only so little ticket money and so many benefit performances. This time we've suffered a great loss." Li Yi shook his head and looked at him. With sincere and heartfelt words he said, "Don't always think about money. You also have to think about contributing to society." Chapter 899. People should look forward to the future, but they couldn't always focus on money. Fang had never been an educated man, so it was normal that he couldn't keep up with the times. Therefore, it was necessary to help him establish a correct outlook on life and values. For example, money could never be used up. When the time was right, he should give back to the society by helping the people perform for free so that they could enjoy a 5D movie experience. Although he would lose money, he would be giving back to the society, which would help him realize his self-worth. Looking at his confused face, Qin Fan knew that he didn't understand. But this was not a big deal. The current old Fang's state of mind was much higher than before. He did good deeds without leaving his name, risked his life, and used his private money to support a single girl for 3 years without asking for anything in return. Even in this era where people's hearts were not so fickle, it was still very rare. This world doesn't give the poor a chance to live. Earth, you don't know what's good for you. Heaven, you don't know what's good for you. I don't want to shed even half a star of blood in the mortal world. If I have a stomach full of resentment, I will feel the 6 ice flowers rolling like a brocade, so that my body won't be exposed. From now on, the Chuzhou city will suffer from 3 years of drought. Inside the brothel, someone would stand up and shout from time to time. This was a typical example of someone who was too engrossed in the scene and placed himself in it. There was no need for the staff of the brothel to remind them at all. Someone beside them would press them down so that they wouldn't spoil everyone's interest. In another brothel, in a remote corner, the man handed a handkerchief to the middle-aged man next to him and sighed. "Lord Five, wipe your tears." The middle-aged man wiped his tears and heaved a sigh. "Well done. It's a good performance." The burly man nodded. If he didn't know that this was a play, he would have rushed up and punched that dog official to death with 3 punches when blood was splashed on the white rope and snow was flying in the 6th month of June. The middle-aged man stared at the stage and murmured, "Doe's grievances could be redressed, but I wonder how many more people's grievances are still buried in the darkness." The burly man shook his head and said, "The imperial court is already vigorously investigating the unjust and false cases. Those filthy and ugly fellows hiding in the dark will one day be dragged out and exposed to the sun." The middle-aged man nodded. "Yes, the sun is about to rise. How could it be? How could she sue the Ministry of Justice?" Cui Qingming's face was filled with rage. The teacup in his hand fell to the ground and the tea splashed everywhere. He gasped for breath and loudly said, "Last time we have already lost an assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice. Now the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Luigi, is only following that person's orders. That woman is still in prison. How could such a thing happen? She caused trouble twice a few days ago and has already attracted the attention of some people. Without a reason we can't keep her in prison forever." Zheng Shichen shook his head and said, "I thought she would be more obedient after being locked up for so long. Who would have thought that as soon as she went out, the people following her were not paying attention and made her kneel in front of the Ministry of Justice?" Cui Qingming returned to his seat and calmed down for a while. Then he said in a deep voice, "I will take care of this case. Otherwise, if it really gets investigated, not to mention Chu Ping, even you, the capital governor, will not be able to protect yourself." As soon as he finished speaking, a runner came in to report that the Ministry of Justice had arrived. Cui Qingming suddenly stood up from his seat, his face full of shock. How could it be so fast? The case of Miss Shuang of the Wonderful Sound Pavilion quickly had new developments. The case file of the capital governor's office that had accepted the case was full of loopholes and could not withstand scrutiny. The coroner who had examined the corpse also revealed the truth under the interrogation of the Ministry of Justice. That night, Miss Shuang was not killed by the criminal. Instead, she was tortured and humiliated to death. As for why the murderer was said to be the criminal who might not have appeared, they would have to ask the young master of the Chu family who was in the same room as Miss Shuang. The Cui family. A middle-aged man slammed the table and said angrily, "How could there be such a big oversight? Does Zheng Shichen not have a brain? Doesn't he know what time it is?" Then a suspicious expression appeared on his face and he muttered, "Could it be Zheng Shichen? What good does this do for him?" Cui Qingming shook his head and said, "This case has attracted the attention of the court and the people. If it is found out, not only will he lose his position as the capital governor, but he will also lose his official position." The middle-aged man revealed a defeated expression. "That Louis is a ruthless character. It is said that there is no case that he cannot solve. This time I'm afraid that the Chu family—" "One Chu family, one capital governor, we—" Cui Qingming clenched his fists and asked through gritted teeth, "What's the situation with the Chu family?" The middle-aged man shook his head and said, "The Ministry of Justice has not summoned Chu Ping for the time being, but it should be soon. In that place, no matter how tight-lipped one is, it is inevitable. What about that matter? The people no longer trust the Chu family. Even those great scholars do not dare to risk universal condemnation and speak casually. After all, this case has too many implications, and the situation is not optimistic." Cui Qingming thought for a long time and loosened his fists. He slowly said, "The Chu family can't be saved, but the capital governor may not." The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Will we also be dragged into this matter?" Cui Qingming shook his head and said, "Zheng Shichen is a smart man. He knows what to do." The Ministry of Justice investigated cases very quickly, and this case was extremely fast. They had no choice but to act quickly. The entire capital was watching the progress of the case, so they did not dare to delay. And this case was actually not complicated. There was no need to summon the grandson of the Grand Tutor. The several bailiffs of the capital government who knew about the case confessed everything not long after they were brought to the Ministry of Justice. They had indeed been pursuing a criminal that day, but the criminal had not been in the Fine Sound Pavilion. They had accidentally stumbled upon young Master Chu's deed, only to discover to their shock that young Master Chu, who liked to play tricks, had accidentally strangled the young lady to death. What happened next was logical. The Chu family was a famous noble family in the capital. How could they tolerate such a stain on a member of their family? Naturally, they used the power of the family to cover up this matter. Thus, the cause of Lady Shuang's death became a crime committed by a fugitive. The young master of the Chu family, who was originally the murderer, suddenly became the victim. In order to cover up the truth, they quickly disposed of Lady Shuang's body. When Lady Shuang's sister went to the Yamen to complain, they were afraid that the matter would be exposed, so they also arrested her and threw her into prison. Adding insult to injury, this was simply insane. The injustice of Do Yi was just a play and could not be taken seriously, but Lady Shuang's grievance had really happened right beside them. They had heard it with their own ears, seen it with their own eyes, and had always been paying attention. And during the course of the trial, the bailiffs of the capital government revealed another secret that further solidified Chu Ping's crime. Not long ago, the disappearance of a girl that had caused an uproar actually also had the shadow of this young master of the Chu family. However, this matter was still concealed by the all-powerful Chu family. It was precisely because of this young master of the Chu family's perverted hobby that Lady Shuang had died a wrongful death. Lady Shuang must have been forced by that beast. No wonder it snowed on the night of the Lantern Festival. I originally thought that it was a strange phenomenon that happened once every few decades, but it turns out that the heavens were crying out for Lady Shuang's injustice. To think that I had always thought that the Chu family was the backbone of our Jing kingdom, that Grand Tutor Chu was a just and righteous person, but who would have thought? He still has the cheek to say that Lord Li is a sycophant? What has Lord Li done? He has made great contributions to the country and the people, but he is not the least bit proud of it. He has even repeatedly resigned from his position and refused to be rewarded. And what about him? He covered up for his descendant, causing such a huge injustice. How can he still be called a scholar? He even wants to frame Lord Li, the pillar of our Jing kingdom. If not for Prime Minister Qin and the other officials in the imperial court, I'm afraid. Sycophant, this is a true sycophant. Old and undying, a great traitor to the country. In the court, Lu Qingtian slammed the gavel. Summon Chu Ping. A few bailiffs quickly walked out of the main gate and headed towards the Chu family. At first, there were only a few people following behind them. Soon it became 10, then 100. After passing through an alley, the crowd behind them could no longer be seen. Chapter 900. The Chu family. Is this real or not? Grand Tutor, what should we do? The public's discontent is already boiling outside. They're coming here. Several elders paced back and forth in the hall with anxious expressions on their faces. Because of the Fine Sound Pavilion murder case, the Chu family had already been pushed to the heart of the struggle. As the case progressed, although most of the officials could still maintain their calm due to the prestige of the Grand Tutor, the common people of the capital had already lost trust in the Chu family and the elders. Yesterday, a rather famous scholar had been smashed in the head with a rock for merely saying, "a sycophant harming the country," against County Marquis Li. His body was covered in rotten leaves and he was in an extremely sorry state. When he returned home, even the walls of the courtyard had been pushed down. The cause of all this was the Chu family. The Chu family had won the hearts of the people, but they had also lost the hearts of the people. The old man before them was just an ordinary old man. Grand Tutor Chu sat in a chair with a calm expression. It was impossible to tell what was on his face. He only stared blankly at the door as if in thought, but his eyes were empty. A servant of the Chu family ran in a panic and shouted, "The Ministry of Justice is here." Several constables walked in and slowly bowed to the old man in the chair. The one in the lead said, "Lord Grand Tutor, we suspect that your grandson is related to a serious case. Please come with us, young Master Chu." A middle-aged man rushed out from the side and shouted, "You think you can take Pinger away just because you suspect him?" The constable took out an item from his sleeve and handed it over. He bowed and said, "Lord Chu, this is a warrant from the Ministry of Justice. Please take a look." The middle-aged man didn't even look at the warrant. He said coldly, "How can a member of the Chu family be taken away so easily by the Ministry of Justice? Without His Majesty's imperial edict, I'd like to see who dares to act recklessly in the Chu family." The constable's face showed some difficulty when he heard this. This was the Chu family. The Chu family was different from other family clans. With Grand Tutor Chu present, even the members of the Ministry of Justice could not act too brazenly. Of course, if the Chu family was reasonable, things would naturally go smoothly. If they insisted, they would probably have to seek His Majesty's decree. The constable looked at him and bowed. If that's the case, we'll take our leave first. After the bailiffs left, the middle-aged man quickly walked up to Grand Tutor Chu and said loudly, "Father, are you going to watch as they take Ping-er away?" Qingwen is right. The change of dynasties, the rise and fall of clans, these are all fated. How can there be a dynasty that can last for thousands of generations? How can there be a clan that can last forever? Grand Tutor Chu climbed up from the chair with some effort and murmured, "This old man is really old. When one gets old, it's easy to become confused." "Father, I'll leave this matter to you." A few constables walked out of the Chu family's door, but they did not leave. This was because in front of them was a crowd that stretched as far as the eye could see. Where is Chu Ping? Why didn't that beast come out? Is it because the Chu family refuses to release him? Before the constables could answer, the crowd had already surged forward. When the Chu family's gatekeeper saw the black mass of people, he was frightened out of his wits and immediately closed the door. "Hand over Chu Ping. Hand over the murderer. Return Lady Shuang's innocence. The people inside, listen up. You have been surrounded. Hurry up and hand over Chu Ping." Inside the Chu family, they heard the deafening shouts coming from outside. Even the ground beneath their feet was trembling. The faces of the elders were pale and their hearts were filled with extreme fear. It was not difficult to imagine how many people were outside from the sound and the situation. Once the Chu family's door was breached, the entire Chu family would be razed to the ground. Inside the Chu family's ancestral hall, an elder with white hair and beard faced the memorial tablet of the Chu family ancestor. He knelt on a praying mat as tears streamed down his face. "Unfilial descendant, you have brought shame to the Chu family ancestor." In the capital's county government, County Magistrate Liu, who was flipping through the case files, jumped in fright when he heard the voice that resounded throughout the capital. He was caught off guard and the pen in his hand fell to the ground. In the imperial palace, Emingzu put down the memorial and slowly walked out of the hall. She looked at the sky outside the palace walls. "What's the situation outside?" She seemed to be talking to herself. A female official walked over from the side and said respectfully, "Rest assured, Your Highness. I have already sent the imperial guards over. There won't be any trouble." In Hibiscus Garden, Emperor Jing, who was lying on the sickbed, slowly opened his eyes. Changde walked over and closed a window. "Grand Tutor Chu, what a pity." Changde narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "His death is not to be regretted for delaying His Majesty's illness." In the Li family, Li covered the little fellow's ears to prevent him from being frightened by the sounds outside. When the first sound had come, it had startled the little fellow who had been taking an afternoon nap. He immediately bawled. It was not easy to coax him back to sleep, but the sounds outside still continued. His hand covered Li Duan's ears, but a hint of melancholy and pity appeared on his face. At this moment, whether inside or outside the capital, no matter what they were doing, almost everyone stopped what they were doing and raised their heads to look at the sky. In the sky, there were birds fleeing in all directions in fright. "Hand over Chu Ping. Hand over Chu Ping." The Chu family. The tightly shut doors slowly opened. Everyone was about to rush in when they saw the old man with the cane in front of them. They could not help but take a few steps back. The deafening sounds also gradually quieted down. "All of this is my fault." Grand Tutor Chu handed his cane to the servant next to him and slowly knelt in front of the crowd. In a hoarse voice he said, "I have let down that lady, let down the ancestors of the Chu family, and let down the people of the world. Grandfather, get up. This is not your fault." After a sigh, a figure limped out from the crowd at the back. He walked in front of Grand Tutor Chu and carefully helped him up. He smiled and said, "It's not a good feeling to kneel. You're already so old. Kneeling like this will hurt your legs." Two servants of the Chu family hurriedly helped Grand Tutor Chu. Chu Ping did not even look at the crowd discussing outside the door. He slowly knelt in front of Grand Tutor Chu and heavily kowtowed. "I didn't mean to kill Lady Shuang. However, it's no longer important to say these things now. You've brought me to so many places in the past, seen so many sceneries and met so many people. I'm really grateful to you." Chu Ping kowtowed again. As he stood up, he said, "Everyone says the capital is good. In the past, when I was outside, I always thought about coming back. Only after coming back did I realize that the capital is actually the most boring place. Thank you. I'm sorry. He stood up and apologized to Grand Tutor Chu. He turned to face the vast crowd outside the Chu family and said loudly, "Everything that I, Chu Ping, have done is my own doing. It has nothing to do with the Chu family." Thud, 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 thud. He knelt down on both knees and heavily kowtowed 3 times to the crowd. After the 3 kowtows there was no more sound. He knelt there silently. The constable closest to him seemed to have thought of something. He took a step forward and gently pushed him. Chu Ping's body fell sideways. A dagger was stabbed straight into his chest. Fresh blood stained his clothes. Chapter 901. Seeing that young Master Chu was clearly no longer breathing, the constable took 2 steps back with a look of disbelief. There was no end to the exclamations in the crowd. No one expected Chu Ping to be dead. He had chosen to commit suicide in front of so many people. Was this suicide to escape punishment or death to atone for his crimes? Pinger. A middle-aged man rushed out from the Chu family crowd and picked up the corpse on the ground. His face was filled with grief as he wailed out loud. Grand Tutor Chu's body went limp. Fortunately, the Chu family servants behind him supported him, preventing him from falling. After he straightened his body, he waved away the Chu family servants who were supporting him and walked to the constable. He asked in a hoarse voice, "Are you taking his corpse away as well?" The constable immediately took 2 steps back and bowed. The evidence in this case was conclusive. If Chu Ping were still alive, he would naturally be brought to the Ministry of Justice for interrogation. But since he was dead, he had to leave some face for the Chu family. Chu Ping's corpse was brought in and the Chu family's main door slowly closed. The crowd outside stood in front of the Chu family for a long time, but ultimately did not rush in. Pui? What bullsh** t? Someone spat viciously at the Chu family's main door before turning to leave. Someone said angrily, "Pui? That old sycophant. Chu Ping is dead. Miss Shuang should rest in peace." Another person sighed and walked a few steps before turning back to face the Chu family's main door. Pui. On this day, nearly all the citizens of the capital came to the Chu family's front door for a tour. Although everyone had left, the Chu family's front door had become filthy. Even the signboard on the front door had been smashed down. A noble family of a generation had been reduced to such a state overnight. It also made countless officials and nobles in the capital realize how powerful the commoners they usually looked down on were. Chu Ping had committed suicide to atone for his crimes, but the Chu family's matter was not over yet. When Grand Tutor Chu was still a scholar in the Jing kingdom, he had cleansed the emperor's side and admonished the emperor. This was a matter of great moral integrity. But now that his moral integrity had been stripped away, all he had done was to slander the important officials of the court, form a clique for personal gain, harbor evil intentions, and even commit treason such as forcing the emperor to leave the Golden Palace. Moreover, he had harbored criminals and abused his power for personal gain. How could he escape the punishment of the law? Every generation of Grand Tutors had resigned due to old age. Grand Tutor Chu was the only one who had been stripped of his title by the imperial court. Chu Ping's father had also been stripped of his official position. The Chu family's former glory was gone, and no one ever mentioned the title of the scholarly bones of the Jing kingdom. Under the heavy punishment of the court, although the Chu manor was still preserved and the property was not confiscated, the people of Jingdo never saw the tightly closed front door of the Chu family open again. None of the great scholars who had once stood with Grand Tutor Chu said anything about this matter. In reality, it wasn't that they didn't say anything. In the beginning there were some who spoke out, but before the court could react, they all disappeared because of the public opinion. Chu Ping died and the truth came to light. Lady Shuang's injustice was cleared. The court felt wronged and set up a tomb for her in Jingdo for the people to worship. It also erected a warning monument for the government. The people would forever remember the name Shuang. It was because of her death that the court paid attention to cases of injustice among the people and accelerated the reform of the law. It made the government truly a place to redress the grievances of the people and not a filthy place where those important people abused their power for personal gain. In this process, there were also some things that happened that exceeded everyone's expectations. After the case was concluded, the capital governor Tsing Shichen, who was deeply involved in this case, was restored to his position. Although he was also fined 3 years of his salary, compared to the impact of this case and the Chu family's ending, it was really nothing. The reason was that Lady Shuangshuang's older sister was very protective of this Sirtsang in court. Although she had been arrested and thrown into the Yaman's prison, from beginning to end she had not been mistreated or treated unfairly. The Yaman's bailiffs had taken good care of her in prison. Even when she was able to walk to the Ministry of Justice, it was the Yaman's people who escorted her. This clearly didn't make sense. If Zheng Shichen really wanted to seal her mouth, then he should have silenced her as soon as possible. Why did he give her so much preferential treatment? Even when she was being tortured, he played it down and went through the motions. In reality, when a few clever people heard this, they had already figured out the whole story. This Sirtsang had arrested her and thrown her into prison. It looked like he was persecuting her, but he was actually protecting her. This was because the Chu family's background was very deep. Grand Tutor Chu alone could unite many of the great scholars, and even half of the officials in court to slander a pillar of the court who had made a great contribution to this country. What was a capital governor to them? He couldn't resist the Chu family, so he could only use this method to protect the girl. Otherwise, Lady Shuangshuang's case would probably never be overturned. A loyal official became a sycophant, a clean stream became a dirty stream, an upright official became a treacherous official, and then became an upright official again. Just like these days in the capital, the storm rose and then calmed and then rose again. The injustice of Doi came to an end and there was a new show in the brothel. The storm had calmed down a bit and only a few ripples remained, enough to serve as a side dish for the people of the capital. You're talking about that sycophant. In a bun shop, a scholar in a scholarly robe had just spoken when a bun flew from the front and smashed into his face, followed by an angry voice. Who are you calling a sycophant? Say it again. The scholar picked up the bun that had fallen to the ground and looked at the shopkeeper of the bun shop. He said in a daze, I said that Grand Tutor Chu was a scholar, loved and respected by the people and trusted by the officials. Who would have thought that he would do such a thing to ruin his reputation? It's really? The shopkeeper of the bun shop looked surprised. Ah, you mean that old sycophant? Who else could it be? The owner of the bun shop waved his hand and said awkwardly, Hi, I'm really sorry. I got addicted to smashing you scholars a while ago. It's fine. That bun is on me, it's free. The Chu family has now completely declined. No one in the capital is willing to have anything to do with them. After the reform of the law, the pressure on the government has increased a lot. Fortunately, after that period of busyness, the pressure has lessened a lot. Most cases are actually not that complicated, and it's not every day that there's a case of injustice. Without Grand Tutor Chu leading the way, that matter can be considered to have completely calmed down. Emingzi looked at Li Yi and sighed. It's finally over. After a long time without receiving a response, she extended her hand and waved it in front of Li Yi's eyes. Li Yi came back to his senses and asked, what did you just say? Emingzi looked at him and finally waved her hand. Nothing. How is this the end? Li Yi shook his head. He lifted the curtain of the carriage and said, This is just the beginning. He jumped down from the carriage and walked towards a building in front of him. It was an ancestral hall. In the ancestral hall there was a stone tablet. The people of the capital lined up like flowing water. After placing an incense stick in front of the stone tablet, they left through the other side. Li Yi lined up and placed an incense stick in front of the stone tablet. He then stood to the side for a while before walking out. Emingzi was still standing next to the carriage looking at another carriage. A green-clothed manservant walked over from that side. He bowed and said respectfully, My master invites you over. Li Yi looked at him and asked, Who is your master? You'll know when you get there, my lord. Li Yi looked at the carriage that was parked in the corner and walked towards it. As he walked to the side of the carriage, the curtain was lifted by a withered hand, revealing a face covered in wrinkles. The old man seemed to have aged another 10 years since the last time he had seen him. Li Yi cupped his hands and said, Grand Tutor, long time no see. Behind the curtain, the old man looked at him emotionlessly and said in a hoarse voice, You once asked me if it was worth it. For my own selfishness I buried the entire Chu clan. It was indeed not worth it. He shook his head, his eyes suddenly becoming sharp. But the eldest imperial son returning to the capital to inherit the throne is natural. Have you ever thought about what you are doing? What you are doing is worth it. Just what do you want? He looked at Li Yi and asked, Prince Jin is young and you have no contact with the other princes. Tell me just what do you want? Li Yi looked at him and slowly asked, Grand Tutor, do you really want to know? Grand Tutor Chu said nothing and only stared fixedly at him. Since Grand Tutor wants to know, Li shook his head and walked into the carriage. Grand Tutor Chu leaned forward. He moved his head closer and whispered, "I won't tell you." Chapter 902. As the carriage drove past, there was a violent cough coming from inside. Emingzu turned back to look at Li Yi. "What did you say to Grand Tutor?" Li Yi shook his head. "Nothing." Emingzu looked at the carriage in front again. The coughing gradually faded away. She continued to look at him with a look that said, "Do you believe me?" "I swear on the honor of a sycophant." Li Yi raised 4 fingers. "I really didn't say anything to him." The main reason for the Chu family's demise was not the Cui family. Under normal circumstances, the 2 crimes that Chu Ping had committed, according to the previous laws of the Jing kingdom, were nothing more than a high-class person killing a low-class person and having to pay some silver taels. Even Chu Ping himself might not be severely punished. The real reason was Grand Tutor Chu. From his inaction in the beginning or his shielding to his worsening later, Grand Tutor Chu could not turn back, nor could the Chu family. All of this was caused by Grand Tutor Chu, who cherished his reputation and was extremely famous. The Chu family rose because of its reputation, and was also dragged down by it. It was a century-old family that had fallen to such a state. He had once asked Grand Tutor Chu whether it was worth it or not. Grand Tutor Chu did not answer but gave the answer with his actions. But no matter what, this old man was once prominent and was still watched by countless people. If he was told that the king of Shu was not his majesty's biological son, and that he wanted Emingzu to be the empress, Grand Tutor Chu might have a heart attack or a brain hemorrhage. If he was not careful, he would not be able to clear his name. The 2 did not get on the carriage again but walked back. When they were about to walk past the ancestral hall, 2 figures walked toward them. The middle-aged man walking in front raised his head and was slightly stunned. He immediately cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, Your Highness." "Greetings, Lord Li." Emingzu turned back to look at Li Yi, the doubt in her eyes obvious. "Qin He, the 5th son of Prime Minister Qin." Li Yi explained to her, then looked at 5th Master Qin and pointed at his hair, his eyes full of doubt. "Oh, about that." 5th Master Qin smiled and said, "I'm old, so I'm not like you young people." Li Yi nodded and then slightly cupped his hands. "Thank you, Prime Minister Qin, for dealing with the matters in the court recently. Please thank him on my behalf. I will personally visit him another day to thank him. My father is only doing what he thinks is right. We can't say anything." 5th Master Qin shook his head and said, "However, I will convey Lord Li's message." Li Yi looked at the ancestral hall behind him and asked, "Did you also come to pay your respects to Lady Shuangshuang?" 5th Master Qin nodded and said, "Although Lady Shuangshuang is no longer here, her death is meaningful. There are so many people who remember her, and there are countless people who are deeply grateful to her. Her death alone accomplished something that the entire court could not do. It is worthy of worship." On the way back, Emingzu looked at him and asked, "Is he Qin He, the Qin He that Uncle Wang mentioned?" "What, he doesn't look like him." She shook her head and said, "I just feel that a person who is worthy of Uncle Wang's evaluation shouldn't be like this." Don't be fooled by this 5th master of the Qin clan's sloppy appearance. Li Yi smiled and said, "He's a truly powerful person." In the ancestral hall, after the 2 of them burned incense in front of the stone tablet, they entered the ancestral hall. As soon as they entered, they saw a statue of a woman the size of a normal person. Below the statue was a spacious platform. After people burned incense outside, they would place the things they brought to pay their respects on this platform. The burly man asked mysteriously, "5th Master, the person beside Lord Li just now was the princess? What, do I not look like her?" 5th Master Qin casually asked as he placed a plate of pastries in the box on the platform. "To be honest, she doesn't look like her." The burly man nodded. Just as he was wondering why he hadn't noticed before, he suddenly heard a cracking sound. He turned his head to look at 5th Master beside him and said in surprise, "5th Master, where did you get the apple in your hand?" 5th Master Qin casually pointed to the fruit plate on the platform that was clearly missing an apple. "There, it tastes pretty good. Do you want it?" "This?" The burly man looked at him in disbelief. "This was given to Lady Shuangshuang by someone else." "5th Master, you, Shuangshuang?" 5th Master Qin shook his head and said, "She doesn't like eating apples. It's a waste to keep it." Crack. Another sound. "What are you doing over there?" At this moment, there were still many people in the ancestral hall. When someone raised his head and saw this scene, he immediately stood up in anger. "You even dare to eat something given to Lady Shuangshuang." Has your conscience been eaten by a dog? What? Who did it? Take them to the officials. The burly man grabbed an apple and grabbed Fifth Master Qin's arm. He hurriedly said, "What are you waiting for? Run." A moment later, in an alley in Jianghu, Fifth Master Qin panted heavily. He patted a footprint on his body and asked, "What? How is this apple?" The burly man took a bite and nodded. "It's crispy and sweet. Why doesn't Lady Shuang like it?" Fifth Master Qin leaned against the wall and sighed. "Yes, I also don't understand why she doesn't like it." He was silent for a moment. After waiting for the burly man to finish eating the apple, he said, "Wu Er, how long have you been following me?" The burly man froze for a moment. In the next moment he threw away the apple and clapped his hands. Solemnly he said, "Fifth Master, tell me, what do you want me to do this time?" "Go follow the little Duke and see what he's been doing these days. I'm the best at following people." The burly man patted his chest. "With me doing things, Fifth Master can rest assured. The trail is broken." Li Yi sighed and said, "How could it be broken?" Lu Yi shook his head and said, "The Ministry of Justice and the Secret Intelligence Bureau couldn't find anything. The person behind this case must have great power in Jianghu." Li Yi rubbed the space between his brows and suddenly felt a headache coming on. He tilted his head to look at the princess and said helplessly, "Now there's only the Cui family left. Why don't we choose another path?" Emingzi looked at him and asked in confusion, "What path?" "I know a path that leads directly to the central lake of the Academy of Mathematics. If we go at night, we'll definitely not be discovered. Why don't we take advantage of the darkness and wind? Sink the Cui family into the lake. You also think this is a good idea, right? It's simple, convenient, and saves time. Do you want me to help you kidnap Consort Cui out of the palace?" "If you can help, that would be great." Li Yi met her eyes. Lu Yi quickly looked out the window. A moment later, Li Yi shook his head and said, "Forget it. It's dark and I can't see the road clearly. Let's think about it at length. If the Cui family could be taken down so easily, father wouldn't have waited until now." Emingzi shook her head and said, 20 years ago, their power had already seeped into every corner of the imperial court. They also have a good reputation among the people. Although they are not as powerful as before, they still have a foundation that cannot be underestimated." Li Yi sighed and said, "That's why I said it's more convenient to choose another path." Fang strode in from outside and handed him an envelope. He said, "Young master, there's news from Wu Er." Li Yi opened the envelope and looked at it. He handed it to Lu Yi and said with a smile, "Isn't it connected now?" Chapter 903. Li Yi handed the letter to Lu Yishui and said, "Keep an eye on Qin Yu. You should be able to find something." Lu Yishui took the letter and looked at it. He nodded and said, "I understand." Emingzi seemed to understand what he wanted to do. When she walked into the courtyard, she turned around and asked, "Are you going to deal with the Cui family the same way you dealt with the Chu family?" "The Cui family has many henchmen. They won't do many things themselves. As long as the matter of the king of Shu is not exposed, unless the Cui family is plotting a rebellion, it won't have much impact on the general situation." Li shook his head and said, "Let's take one step at a time. A dam of 1,000 miles will collapse because of an ant's nest. If we add up all the things one by one, it might be the last straw that breaks the camel's back." Mingzhu's tone was firm. "We can't let father know about that matter no matter what." "Of course I know that. Otherwise the Cui family will die countless times for this crime." Li Yi had thought about this contradiction many times. It was obvious that it was easy to destroy the Cui family through that matter, but it was easier to destroy the old emperor. They couldn't take this risk. The two reached a tacit understanding on this matter. There was nothing to discuss. Li Yi saw Mississippi Lu on the other side of the courtyard. She seemed to have just finished practicing. He thought for a moment and waved his hand. "Rui, come here for a moment." Mississippi Lu put down autumn water and walked over. She cast an inquiring look at him. Li Yi looked at the two standing together. After a moment, he looked at Mississippi Lu and said in surprise, "I find that you have been growing recently. I remember that you were shorter than the princess at the beginning. Now you are the same height." Mississippi Lu looked at him. "When have I ever been shorter than her?" "Ah, you didn't?" Li shook his head and said, "Then I must have remembered wrongly again. I don't know what happened to my memory recently." Li walked the princess out the door and saw sister-in-law Fang walking over from afar. When he saw the person beside her, he was instantly stunned. He closed his eyes in disbelief, and when he opened them again, sister-in-law Fong was already talking to the woman beside her with a smile. Li looked back at Mississippi Lu and asked, "Who's the girl next to Mrs. Fong? I've never seen her before." Mississippi Lu looked in that direction and said, "Yesterday when Aunt Fong went to the temple to offer incense, she met Miss Xiao on the road. Miss Xiao came to the capital to seek shelter with her relatives, but she couldn't find her and was robbed of her traveling expenses. Aunt Fong pitied her and temporarily took her in." Miss Xiao. Li nodded and sighed. Sister-in-law Fong is really kind. Sister-in-law Fong actually treats people very well, and Uncle Fong is also not bad. It's just that he looks a little fierce usually, Li nodded. Speaking of which, you two are quite similar, but you don't know how to use a broom when you fight, which is much better than her. Mississippi Lu's temper had really improved recently, and Li couldn't help but feel that his youth was gone forever. She could even cook a bowl of noodles that tasted pretty good by herself. The unruly, willful, unreasonable, and unworldly Mississippi Lu seemed to be gone forever. Of course, the person who made him feel that time could change a person the most was Fong. He had quietly sent sister-in-law Fong's biggest enemy to her side, and the two of them could get along with each other like sisters. There was harmony inside and outside the house. Li didn't think he had the ability to do so. Some things have to be faced. I don't have the ability of the son-in-law, so of course I have to find another way. When Fong said this, his face was shrouded in a sacred glow. For him this was indeed a big deal. To be able to let sister-in-law Fong and Little Red get along like sisters, this was simply a fantasy, unbelievable, and something that he didn't even dare to think about in the past. In contrast, his own affairs were more difficult to deal with. Although drunk Mo's tone had relaxed these days, it seemed that she was still not completely mentally prepared. And this was just drunk Mo. The road was long and the revolution had not yet succeeded. Comrades still needed to work hard. In the old house of the Zheng family, drunk Mo helped them make tea. When they walked back to the room, Tsing Shichen said, "After this incident, the Cui family probably doesn't trust me much anymore." This did not come as a surprise to Li Yi. That case involved a lot of people and it was the focus of the entire capital. Removing him from it would undoubtedly be a hell of a challenge. One careless move and it would cause a wave of public opinion. When the Cui family knew that they couldn't protect the Chu family, they had actually used the power of the court to protect him, the capital governor. However, they encountered great obstacles and in the end they had no choice but to stop. In this way, the subsequent reversal of public opinion seemed extremely suspicious. With the protection of that girl, if the Cui family still didn't suspect them, they would have been eaten up in the capital. Although the king of Shu is still in Shuzhou, as long as his majesty doesn't appoint a crown prince, he is still the most promising. Tseng Shichen looked at him and said slowly, "Once something happens to his majesty, the king of Shu will inherit the throne. This is almost without a doubt. Until now, are you still not willing to tell me which side you are on? Although the Cui family probably won't do anything to you, you still have to be careful." Li didn't answer. He just warned him and turned to go inside. A thoughtful look appeared on Tseng Shichen's face. After a moment, he dipped his finger in the tea and wrote 2 words on the table. Soon he crossed out the 2 words Prince Jean on the stone table. In the situation where his majesty still had adult princes, the possibility of a child inheriting the throne was too small. For the sake of the overall situation, his majesty would not make such a choice. On this point, Li definitely knew better than he did. As for the other princes, whether it was status or talent, they were far inferior. More importantly, those princes were far away in their fiefdoms, and Li Yi had no contact with them. Apart from Prince Jean, among the princes, there was not a single one who had both a high status and a close relationship with him. However, he had a close relationship with the princesses. She had offended the king of Shu for Princess Yongning, causing the Cui family to see him as a thorn in their side. Princess Shaning was also very close to him, and there was no barrier when they got along. As for the eldest princess, needless to say, it was said that they were close friends when they were in Qing and Prefecture. In the past few years in the capital, the eldest princess established the Women's College and the Women's Union. She was deeply loved by the women in the capital, and founded the academy, which won the hearts of the scholars in the world. Ever since she took over the government, all the civil and military officials in the court would praise the eldest princess when they mentioned her. There were countless officials in the court who were as loyal to her as they were to his majesty. Who would still dare to treat her as a woman? Not to mention, great scholar Chu's actions backfired and he lost the hearts of the people. Her Highness reformed the law, which was also applauded by the people. Behind all these things, there was actually his shadow. It was strange that he didn't know what he was thinking. Instead of supporting a prince, he spared no effort to do these things for the eldest princess. What was he thinking? Sing Shichen picked up the teacup and put it down again, the expression on his face frozen. Chapter 904. In the room, Madame Chen was teaching drunken ink embroidery. For the daughters of the noble families in the capital city, embroidery was a necessary skill. Most of them would embroider their wedding dresses with their own hands before they got married. Seeing Li Yi come in, she quickly hid the wedding dress. Li Yi didn't know what she was thinking. She actually looked at the wedding dress more secretively than the bellyband. He had even seen her wearing the bellyband several times, but she didn't even show him a wedding dress that wasn't embroidered. Madame Chen put their hands together and said, "You two, it's time to pick a day and set the date early. You can't keep dragging it on like this." It's still early?" Drunken Ink lowered her head and whispered. Li Yi glanced at her and said, "What do you mean it's still early?" "It's not early." Watching her break free from his hand and run out quickly, Li Yi shook his head helplessly. Although she usually looked very bold, after the two of them got closer, she became shy. Third Miss Chen looked at her running out with a smile. After a long time, she turned her head and sighed, saying, "You are still young and don't know the dangers of the court. A family can live in peace and harmony. Even if it's a little dull, it's much better than facing those deceitful battles every day." Li Yi lowered his head but didn't speak. No one liked to live in deceit and conspiracy all day long. Compared with this, wasn't it more interesting to play with the children, Rui, and the proud Lolita at home? If you want stability, you must first endure turbulence. She looked outside the door. The two women were talking about something. She turned back and said, "I think Ruoqing is also thinking about you. Although Drunken Ink is here, you can't always ignore her. I can see that her heart is actually more bitter than anyone else. You can't let her down." "I know." Li Yi looked outside the door and nodded. "I won't." She looked at Li Yi, and a rare hint of resentment appeared on her face. "Your father was so devoted back then. In order to elope with your mother, he didn't even want the inheritance of his family. Why is it that when it comes to you, you just have to provoke so many debts of love?" An awkward expression appeared on Li Yi's face. Unable to refute, he could only remain silent. She patted the back of Li Yi's hand and said, "All right, it's your good fortune to be able to gain the favor of so many wonderful people. I only hope that in the future you won't hurt anyone's heart." After saying that, he stood up and said with a smile, "When it comes to you, I can't help but talk too much. Accompany them well, I'm going back." Li Yi stood up at the same time and saw her out. He watched as Qinchong walked out of the tea house across the street. A servant girl of the Qin estate helped her into the carriage. Just as Qinchong was about to get into the other carriage, Li Yi suddenly asked, "Is official Qin this free every day?" Qinchong's hand, which had already lifted the curtain, lowered again. He countered with a question, "Could it be that official Li plans to go to the princess and report me?" "I'm not the kind of person who would report on someone." Li Yi shook his head. "I just want to advise official Chen that you are an official of the imperial court. Every month there will be a few days where you have to pretend to be working hard. Of course, other than this, I also have a small matter to remind official Chen." He slightly lowered his voice and said, "Stay as far away from the Chui clan as possible." A scornful expression appeared on Qinchong's face. Just as he was about to speak, he heard the second half of Chen Changxing's words and froze. He asked, "What do you mean?" "Official Chen will understand." Li Yi looked at him and said once more. Then he turned and walked back into the courtyard. Qinchong was left standing there, his expression solemn. Thousands of thoughts had already flashed through his mind, and in the end they all boiled down to a certain message. The Chui clan was probably going to change. When Li Yi walked back, Zuemo walked out of the room and asked, "Has Madame Chen left?" "She's gone back." Li Yi walked over and put his arm around her slender waist. "She asked me to spend more time with you too." Who asked you to spend more time?" She looked frantically at Zheng Shichen, who was sitting in the courtyard drinking tea, and hurriedly pushed him away. Then she seemed to realize something. Looking at him, she asked uncertainly, "You too?" Li Yi turned and walked quickly in Zheng Shichen's direction. "Lord Zheng, what do you think about that matter just now?" "I think that the king of Shu has no talent or virtue and is indeed not suitable for the throne. Otherwise, the country that His Majesty and the courtiers have painstakingly stabilized would probably be destroyed in his hands." Zheng Shichen thought for a moment and said, among the many princes, His Highness King Jin is an outstanding person, and his status is equally noble. However, King Jin is too young and it is difficult for him to ascend to the throne. At present, apart from His Majesty, the only one who can govern the country well is the eldest princess. However, the eldest princess has already set a precedent by assisting the government. It is really... Li looked at him in surprise and asked, is this what we were talking about just now? What Zheng Shichen said was very reasonable. In fact, the more they talked about it, the more he felt how difficult it was to let Emingzu wear that uniform and experience the temptation of the dragon robe. Their original purpose was just to prevent this great country from falling into the hands of the King of Shu. Now the King of Shu had been eliminated in advance. She did not want the old emperor to know about this, but she would never agree to let the Li family's country fall into the hands of others. In the pavilion in the middle of the lake, Her Highness nodded. That's right. No matter what, this country cannot fall into the hands of the King of Shu. This pavilion had become a place where the two of them talked in secret more and more frequently. Because there was lake water everywhere and the sound of waves was mixed in, unless someone had clairvoyance and hearing, they would not be able to hear what they were talking about. He looked around. There seemed to be a flash of light in the trees by the shore of the lake and disappeared in an instant. Emingzu suddenly said, King Ning has returned to Qin and Prefecture. Li looked back at her and asked, it is already June. They should have returned long ago. What is so strange about this? It is because King Ning has returned that it is strange. Emingzu shook her head and said, this time only King Ning has returned and taken the military seal. It is enough to mobilize 2,000 soldiers. What can 2,000 soldiers do? It is enough to confiscate the ancestral home of the Chui family in Qing'an Prefecture. As for rebellion, I'm afraid it is far from enough. Li Mingzhu looked at the surface of the lake for a long time before turning around. A hint of confusion appeared on her face. I suspect that Fu Huang and Ning Wangshu are hiding something from us, and from the court officials. I can't see it. In the low trees by the lake, Li Xian looked at the two people in the pavilion with their backs facing him and murmured helplessly. With great difficulty he saw Emingzu turn around. He immediately became alert and tightened his grip on the binoculars in his hands. I am pregnant with Father, the Emperor, from the court officials? He frowned and murmured, you spoke so fast, how can I hear you clearly? A look of doubt surfaced on his face. What exactly was Mingzhu thinking? She had hidden it from Uncle Huang and the court officials. She seemed to be at a loss. Platter. As if realizing something, he sucked in a cold breath. Shock appeared on his face. The binoculars in his hands suddenly fell to the ground and he jumped out of the bushes. Li Yi and Emingzu raised their heads and saw Li Xian, who was wearing a garland made of tree branches and decorated with a few small flowers. Surprise appeared on their faces at the same time. Chapter 905. Today, Li Xian was dressed in dark clothes, and the wreath of branches on his head was particularly eye-catching. If he smeared some camouflage paint on his face he would look even more like the real deal. I saw what you said just now. He ran all the way here, panting heavily, and the shock on his face had not faded. Li did not know why he was dressed like this and asked in surprise, what did you see? Li Xian pointed at the binoculars hanging around his neck, and Li Yi was even more confused. Li Xian looked at the two of them and his eyes were filled with extreme surprise. I don't need to listen to what you're saying. I only need to look at your lips to know what you're saying. Li looked at him and his expression was slightly shocked. You've learned to read lips? Without waiting for Li Xian to nod, he remembered that during this period of time, whenever the two of them spoke, he would always stare at his own lips. Could it be that he was really learning to read lips? Then he looked at the binoculars hanging around his neck. Could it be that the purpose of him learning to read lips was to peep and eavesdrop? This guy, what was going on in his mind? Li Yi's lips moved and he asked in disbelief, did you see what I said just now? It's useless even if you scold me. Li Xian's gaze swept back and forth between the two of them and he said, I've already seen what you've said just now. Li Yi and Emingzu looked at each other, and they both felt a headache coming on. The reason why the two of them chose this place was to avoid Li Xian. After all, with his character of wanting to see the world in chaos, if he knew about this matter he might cause some trouble. But no matter how careful they were, they never expected that he would purposely learn to read lips, and the binoculars hanging around his neck were probably high-quality products from the Academy of Science. How could there be such a bored person in the world? This is really too disgraceful. A worried expression appeared on Li Xian's face. He looked at Mingzu and said with a pained expression, "You are the princess, you too, how could you do such a thing?" Looking at the extremely agitated Li Xian, Li looked back at Mingzu and said, "Why don't we sink into the lake? Looks like we can't hide it anymore." Li sighed and looked at Mingzu again and asked, "You or me?" Li Mingzhu waved her hand and sat on a stone chair to the side. She looked at the calm lake and said, "Speak." Li nodded. He looked at Li Xian and asked again, "What did you hear just now?" "You don't have to test me." Li Xian glanced at the two of them and said, "If the imperial uncle, the court officials, and the entire world were to find out about this disgraceful and heinous act, the two of you would no longer have a place in the Jing kingdom." Li shook his head. It seemed that he was really bored to a certain extent and indeed learned to read lips. At this point there was no need to test him anymore. Although the king of Shu has been chased to Shu province and his reputation has been ruined, he is still the eldest son of the emperor. If something happens to his majesty, he will most likely make a comeback and even ascend the throne. Li looked at him and said, "The princes of his majesty have no talent or virtue. If the world falls into their hands, it will end in defeat sooner or later. We have come step by step to where we are today, and we can't let the court go back to its original path. Moreover, with the power in Mingzhu's hands, she will not have a good ending for any of the princes who succeed the throne." Hearing this, Li Xian's face darkened. How could he not understand this logic? Only Uncle Emperor was broad-minded enough to allow the eldest princess to rule the country, and hand over all the affairs of the country to her. Until now, most of the court officials had acquiesced to the eldest princess's existence. But if the new emperor succeeded the throne, he would definitely not allow these powers to be held in the hands of a princess. Even the Academy of Sciences would be out of his control. The precondition for their peace was that Uncle Huang was still in control of the country. Once he was gone, many people's fates would be turned upside down. However, although this was the truth, it had nothing to do with what they said. That was not the point. One was an unmarried princess, and the other was an important official with a family. The two of them were together secretly and no one would find out and everything would be fine. But now that Mingzu was pregnant, they could not hide it for long. Once this matter was made public, it would become the biggest scandal in the royal family, and the two of them would be condemned by everyone. Even if they could keep their lives, they would no longer have a place in the Jing kingdom. Why are you so careless?" Li Xian looked at them exasperatedly and sighed and said, "Go to a place where no one knows you and don't come back. Let me finish first." Li looked at him calmly and Li Xian looked at him, lowered his head and said, "Go ahead. Actually, Prince Jin is the most suitable person to inherit His Majesty's position." Li looked in the direction of the arithmetic school and said slowly, "But he is too young and can't take up the heavy responsibility, so, why are you saying this to me at this time?" "Shut up, let me finish." After Li Xian completely shut up, Li said again, "So, we have to push Mingzu to that position." Li Xian was stunned and looked at him in surprise and asked, "Push to what position?" "His Majesty's position." Li Xian looked at him and then looked at Mingzu and rubbed his head and waved his hand. "Wait a minute, I'm a little confused now, let me sort it out first." After a long time he raised his head again and asked, "Isn't Mingzu pregnant?" Her Royal Highness stood up abruptly and her pretty face blushed. She looked at him and said angrily, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Li Xian said in a daze, "I clearly saw that you said you were pregnant. How long have you been learning to read lips?" Li thought for a moment and suddenly asked. "Less than a month," Li Xian said after thinking for a moment. Li looked straight at him and asked, "You rushed over because you thought Mingzu was pregnant?" Li Xian nodded and said confidently, "What else could it be? What you said just now, was it because of this?" Li rubbed his forehead and asked again. Li Xian was surprised and said, "Could it be that Mingzu is not pregnant and I'm seeing things?" After saying that, he suddenly had a look of realization and looked straight at Li Yi. Wait, what did you say just now? What position should we push Mingzu to?" Li Yi sighed and turned to look at Mingzu. "Why don't we just sink?" Chapter 906. Such an important matter. Li Xian's face was gloomy as he paced back and forth in the pavilion. Occasionally he pointed at the two of them. Li Yi and Mingzu were both silent. Influenced by their traditional education and beliefs, this was the first time they had heard of this matter. It was indeed difficult for them to accept. How dare you not tell me? Li Xian slammed his palm on the stone table and asked angrily, such an important matter, how dare you hide it from me? Are you not treating me as one of your own? The anger on his face only lasted for a moment before disappearing in the next moment. He clapped his hands and said with a face full of surprise, why didn't I think of this idea before? To him, it would be best if he could maintain the current status quo. However, no matter who inherited the throne with his identity and position, he would not have a good life in the capital. However, who was Mingzu? She had grown up with him and the three heroes of the capital had gone through thick and thin together. It was as if they were wearing the same pants. Although it was the two of them who were wearing the same pants now, based on the current situation, if Mingzu could really sit on the throne, it would definitely be the best outcome. However, although she was also the child of the emperor, she was a woman. Would it be difficult for a woman to become the emperor? Thinking about it carefully, the dragon robe did not look good on her either. This matter is not certain yet. Let's not talk about it for now. Li pressed on his shoulder to calm him down. He said, you cannot tell anyone about what happened today, including His Majesty, your father, mother, the crown princess, and your brother Xin. Don't worry, I know the severity of this matter. Other than the three of us, I will not let a fourth person know. Li Xian nodded solemnly, then said, based on what you said, the biggest obstacle in front of us now is the Cui family. The Cui family has done such a rebellious thing, and they are still jumping around in the court all day long. It is really annoying to see. Should we go all out? He turned his head to look. I think this lake in the academy is not bad. Although he didn't know from whom did Li Xian learn this unreliable idea of sinking into the lake, he was right about one thing. As long as the Cui family didn't fall, they wouldn't have peaceful days. This time it was fine if they didn't make a move, but if they made a move, the Cui family wouldn't be able to make a comeback once and for all. As for the secret between the two of them being known by him, it did not affect them much. Li Xian, who was born with a short brain, was muddle-headed on many things, but he had never messed up on a major matter. At least he knew that in the future he wouldn't be like before, always causing trouble at the drop of a hat. He came out to wander around after learning half of lip reading and ended up making such a big mistake. However, this incident also reminded him that there were even perverts in this world who specialized in lip reading and hid in the dark with binoculars to peep at him. In the future, no matter what he did, it was better to be extra careful. After stepping into the house, all the messy thoughts in his mind disappeared. Wife, children, sister-in-law, and the little servant girl who was about to grow up and was gradually getting rid of the silly adorable. This was another small world, blocking all the things that were incompatible with the word home, outside. Mississippi Lu was holding a piece of paper in her hand and saying something to Rui. It was probably because she encountered some words that she didn't know. Rui was the kind of person who could calm down no matter what she did. When the two sisters were young, they also did literacy and other things, but it was probably useless for Mississippi Lu. Li picked up a few pieces of paper that were messily placed on the table and looked at them. Most of them were about the Lu League. The Lu League had already formed a stable system. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was an organization. The elite disciples were all skilled in martial arts. They were famous martial arts masters on the master ranking list and the chivalry ranking list. As for other places, it was more of a relationship similar to a contract. There were many masters in the league and they had strong financial support. They took what they needed from the people in the martial arts world and cooperated with tacit understanding. It could be said that they had completely changed the current situation of the martial arts world. As the leader of the Lu League, Mississippi Lu's growth was amazing. Of course, this did not refer to a specific part of her body. Other than physical growth, there was also psychological growth. Thinking back to 3 years ago, the girl in white who was riding on a horse and holding a sword, and now the girl who frowned and bit her thumb, staring at the piece of paper in front of her seriously, were like two different people. There was another stack of papers on the table. Li also flipped through them. They were all information about the Wu Kingdom. As the only country in the vicinity that had fallen into internal strife, although the imperial court of the Wu Kingdom was strong, there were too many rebels and traitors in the country. It could not be suppressed in a short time. The surrounding countries might have some other ideas besides watching them make a fool of themselves. Seeing him walk in, Rui seemed to have seen her savior. She hurriedly said, "Aya, my husband is back. Quickly help Rui take a look at what's written on this. I've been having a headache these past few days." The reason why Rui had a headache was that Mississippi Lu would ask her whenever she encountered something that she did not understand. In fact, Rui only recognized a few more words than her. When it came to the meaning of poems and articles, she would also have a headache. As for why Mississippi Lu did not ask him directly, Li also felt strange. After Rui spoke, Mississippi Lu reluctantly handed the paper to him. Li glanced at it and knew the reason why Mississippi Lu had a headache. This was something similar to the Imperial Court's spy report. The words and sentences were not like ordinary letters. It was very official and difficult to understand. It was normal for people like Mississippi Lu, who were still in the stage of literacy, to not understand it. Li looked at it and said, "It says that Princess Duanrong of the Wu Kingdom joined forces with a traitor and conquered 2 provinces of the Wu Kingdom in a row. She was captured alive by the Imperial Court and will be executed in a few days." What? Mississippi Lu's expression changed dramatically. Of course it's a lie. Li put the paper aside and said, "It's true that they conquered 2 provinces. They have a lot of soldiers under their command. They used to be in the military camp and have good strength. Now they are in a stalemate with the Imperial Court of the Wu Kingdom. Nothing will happen in a short time." Mississippi Lu took a deep breath, and her chest rose and fell a few times. She looked at him and said, "Come here, I'll show you something good." Did she think he was stupid? If he went with her now, nothing good would come out of it. Li Yi took Li Duan from Rui's arms. After such a long time of guidance, the 8-month-old little guy could make clearer father and mother. Of course he still called Xiaonyang more often. Rui sat down beside him and said softly, "I went to see Sister Zumo today." Li Yi turned to look at her. I've already talked to Sister Zumo. She said that after a few days she will move in with us." Li Yi looked at her in surprise. She agreed? Rui looked at him in confusion and asked, "Why not?" Li Yi suddenly doubted the meaning of life. He nagged her about this matter every day. All his efforts were not as good as a word from Rui? This was a bit too hurtful. When he walked out of the door gloomily, he met a little maid who came in. She looked up at him and said, "Young master, second miss asked you to go to her room. She has a question to ask you." What question could he not ask just now? Why did he have to go to her room? Walking to Mississippi Lu's room on the other side, the door was open. Li knocked on the door and stepped in. Mississippi Lu sat at the table, looked up and said, "Close the door." Li closed the door, then turned his head and asked in confusion, "What's the problem? Why close the door?" Chapter 907. At the door of Mississippi Lu's room, Xiao Huan leaned against a pillar while munching on melon seeds. She carefully listened to the movements inside the room. Inside the room, Li Yi was thrown onto the bed. He covered his buttocks and glared at Mississippi Lu angrily. He said he had a question for her. He was just curious why she closed the door. It turned out that she was going to beat him up. What a heartless fellow. To think that he was so kind and considerate of her. Li Yi looked at her warily and threatened. "If you continue to act like this, I won't accompany you to the Wu Kingdom." "What did you say?" Mississippi Lu was stunned. Her hand that was about to fall stopped in the air. She asked, "What did you say just now? Say it again." "I was thinking of accompanying you to the Wu Kingdom after I'm done with my work. Now, I need to think about it." His original intention was not to go to the Wu Kingdom. Counting the days, Lin Wanru should have reached the Qi Kingdom by now. The business there was about to start. In this year, the situation in the fringe had also changed greatly. Every once in a while there would be news. He had to go and take a look. Since Mississippi Lu was so concerned about her precious disciple, he might have to make a trip to the Wu Kingdom. Of course, before leaving the capital, he had to solve all the remaining problems. To the Wu Kingdom? Mississippi Lu's beautiful eyes lit up. She asked, "When?" "I was thinking of a month or 2. Li shook his head and said, "But now, I'm not going." Mississippi Lu's face was filled with anger. The slender hand that was about to fall fiercely stopped in midair, fell again. But this time it was with a gentle force. A faint smile appeared on her face. She asked with concern, "Does it still hurt?" Li did not have the chance to enjoy Mississippi Lu's gentle massage. He jumped up from the bed and ran out of the door at an unbelievable speed. As he ran out, he grabbed Xiao Huan's melon seeds. He ate them while thinking, "So gentle, so gentle. Mississippi Lu is crazy. She's really crazy. Miss, when are we moving over?" "Miss, do you want me to help you pack?" "Miss, if we move over, what about Sister Ruoqing? Since elder Sister Ruoqing is going there, Xiaozhu will also go there, right?" Zheng Zumo, who was embroidering a wedding dress, raised her head and glanced at Xiao Chui, who was carrying a small bag and wandering in front of her for almost an hour. Zheng Zumo lowered her head again and said, "If you really can't wait, move over first. Anyway, there are other maids in the manor." Xiao Chui hurriedly put down the small bundle and came over with a smile. How could Xiao Chui understand Miss better than the other maids? "Of course I want to be with Miss." Goddess Luo Shui waved her hand and said, "Stay away from me, you're blocking the light." After chasing Xiao Chui away, he lowered his head and looked at a pattern on the wedding dress. He stared blankly for a long time before a vexed expression appeared on his face. "Oh no, I forgot what kind of needle technique to use on this piece." She put the wedding dress and the needle and thread aside and walked towards Ruoqing's room. She remembered that when she was teaching her yesterday she had demonstrated the steps on another brocade handkerchief. During the day there was usually no one in her room. Sometimes there were too many things to do and she might not come back at night. She pushed open the door and very quickly found the brocade handkerchief on the table. She picked it up and looked at it for a while. Not long after, she remembered the steps and put the brocade handkerchief back. Just as she was about to leave, her footsteps suddenly stopped. She turned around and looked at the bed. On the bed, under the pillow, the corner of a book was exposed. She was startled. This was the booklet that was pressed under the pillow by elder sister Ruoqing? For her to hide it like this, it must be something very important or private. Even if the two of them were very close, it would not be good to take it out and look at it when she was not around. She shook her head and walked in the direction of the door. When she walked to the door, her footsteps stopped again and she looked back at the bedside. How about just taking a look? She looked left and right, closed the door like a thief and returned to the bedside. She carefully took out the booklet under the pillow. There were no words on the cover. She carefully flipped to the next page. The first year of Jianghu, the first day of the 7th month. It was indeed elder sister Ruoqing's diary. She knew that Ruoqing had the habit of writing diaries since she was young. Although she did not write every day, she had accumulated a few thick books. At that time, she actually wanted to peek at elder sister Ruoqing's little secrets. However, Ruoqing hid it very well. After a few unsuccessful attempts, she gave up. At this moment, although she was a little frightened, she was actually a little excited that her wish had been fulfilled. Her gaze quickly moved up. The first year of Jianghu, the first day of the 7th month. What happened in that year's 7th month? That sour scholar wrote a love poem for her and was chased out of the jade courtyard by her mother. This matter was actually written in by her. The matter of him secretly eating osmanthus cake. So it was at that time that she was discovered. Poem from beyond the heavens. What nameless scholar? It was clearly that annoying fellow. Mid-Autumn Festival, the matter on the night of the Mid-Autumn Festival, that fellow. She slowly flipped through the pages, and a smile appeared on her pretty face. These were all things that they had experienced together in the past. Now that she recalled it, those memories and feelings from that time would surge out from her mind. She murmured a few words. That annoying fellow, why is he everywhere, even elder sister Ruoqing's diary? She lowered her head and continued to flip through the pages. As the pages turned, the smile on her face gradually froze and dissipated. Then it became a little pale, and a deep sense of loss and confusion began to appear in her eyes. Wan Ruoqing walked into the courtyard and saw Xiao Chui sitting alone in the courtyard. She looked around and asked, "Xiao Chui, where is Zuinmo?" Xiao Chui was holding a triangular prism in her hand. After watching the sunlight pass through it, it became colorful. She was playing happily under the sun. Hearing Wan Ruoqing's voice, she put down the thing in her hand and stood up. She said, "Elder sister Ruoqing is back. Miss was here just now. She should have returned to her room now." She looked back and saw Zheng Zuinmo walking out of a room. She walked over and said, "Miss, elder sister Ruoqing is back." Wan Ruoqing walked over and said with a smile, "The fish he sent yesterday is said to be a tribute from the palace. It's a river fish without many bones. He was worried that they wouldn't know how to cook it, so he told me how to cook it. It's been hot these days. Although it's frozen, it's better to eat it as soon as possible. Lee is so good to Mississippi. He sends fish every few days. The tribute from the palace is really much more delicious than the ones in the market." Xiao Chui said with a smile. Seeing Xiao Zhu holding her treasure and looking it up and down, she immediately trotted over and said anxiously, "This is a gift from Lee." Xiao Zhu curled her lips and walked around the stone table with her. "So what if he gave it to you? Can I play with it?" Xiao Chui said with dissatisfaction. "Lee gave it to me first. I haven't let you play with it yet. You are robbing me." Xiao Zhu stopped and looked at her. "Are we still good sisters? Just let me play with it." Xiao Chui also stopped and hesitated. After a moment she said, Okay, but after you play with it you have to give it back to me. Wan Ruoqing looked at the door of her room and then at her. She asked in confusion, why did you come out of my room? Zheng Zimo smiled and said, I'm stupid. I forgot the needle technique you taught me yesterday, so I went in and looked at it again. It's okay. If you forget, I will teach you again. A woman only gets married once in her life. The wedding dress must be embroidered well. You can't be careless. She smiled and said, wait a moment. I will go to the room to get the needle and thread. Zheng Zimo nodded and walked to the stone table in a daze. Beside her, Xiao Chui looked at Xiao Zhu, who was playing with the prism under the sun. She couldn't help but laugh. Stupid. You don't even know how to do such a simple thing. I will teach you. She looked at the two girls who were laughing and scolding each other, then looked at Wan Ruoqing, who walked into the room. She felt that the wedding dress in her hand was a bit dazzling. Chapter 908. Sister Ruoqing's fish is so delicious. Xiao Chui put a mouthful of fish into her mouth and couldn't help but exclaim. Unlike her mistress, she didn't really like eating fish, but she always made an exception with Sister Ruoqing. If there was someone in this world who could cook as good as Li, it would definitely be Sister Ruoqing. Xiao Zhu pinched her face and said, you're the one who can eat the most. You can have the leftovers later. Looking at the two girls playing, Wan Ruoqing smiled and turned to look at Zheng Zimo, who was holding a pair of chopsticks in her hand and stupidly putting the fish into her mouth but not chewing. She asked in confusion, Zimo, what's wrong? Is today's food not to your taste? Zheng Zimo came back to her senses and shook her head. No, I just don't feel well. Wan Ruoqing put down her chopsticks and touched her forehead. She looked at her and shook her head. It's not hot, but you don't look well. I'll go find a doctor. No need, I'm just a bit tired. I'll be fine after eating and resting. Zheng Zimo shook her head again and said, Sister Ruoqing, I'm moving over soon. You should come with us. Wan Ruoqing shook her head and smiled. I won't be going. Xiao Zhu and I will move back to Willow Lane. We've lived there for a long time and are used to it. Zheng Zimo lowered her head and was silent for a while. She suddenly asked, if I take away something you like very much, what will Sister Ruoqing do? Wan Ruoqing was surprised. What thing? She looked into Wan Ruoqing's eyes and said in a low voice, there's something that Sister Ruoqing likes very much. Something that is very important to you. We both like it very much, but you liked it first. Wan Ruoqing smiled and put a piece of fish in her bowl. Take it if you like it. I don't have anything that I like very much or that's very important to me. What if it's that piece of paper with Immortal Magpie Bridge on it? Wan Ruoqing paused in the middle of taking back her chopsticks. Soon she smiled and nodded. Sure, but I left it in the brothel. I'll bring it to you when I come back tonight. Under the dim candlelight, Wan Ruoqing spread out the yellowed paper. Some parts of the paper had already become tattered. She gently stroked the words on the paper with a faint smile on her face. She didn't know how much time had passed until the oil lamp lit up. She folded it again and walked out the door. She lowered her head and looked at the thing in her hand with some reluctance. Then she knocked on the door next door. The door opened very quickly and Goddess Luo Shui walked out with sleepy eyes. She muttered, Sister Ruoqing, it's already so late. Why aren't you sleeping? Wan Ruoqing handed over the things in her hands. This is for you. She rubbed her eyes, took it with both hands and asked doubtfully, what is it? The things you talked about during the day. She reached out to tidy up her messy hair and said, it's late. Go back to sleep. Zheng Zimo pulled her arm. I want you to talk to me. Before Wan Ruoqing could nod, she was dragged in and sat on the edge of the bed. Zheng Zimo hugged her arm and rested her head on her shoulder. She murmured, I don't want to leave you. You're about to get married, but you're still so childish. Sister Ruoqing, I'm sorry. She suddenly raised her head and looked into Wan Ruoqing's eyes. I stole your favorite thing. Wan Ruoqing shook her head and said, it should have been yours in the first place. What's mine is yours. What's mine is yours. After a moment of silence, Zheng Zimo suddenly smiled. She hugged her waist and said, hee, what I said today was all a lie. How could I steal something that my beloved Sister Ruoqing likes? Don't you like my poetry book very much? I'll give it to you, huh? Seeing her sudden change, Wan Ruoqing was dazed and looked at her with a confused expression. What are you talking about? She hugged Wan Ruoqing and the two of them fell down together. Sleep. Wan Ruoqing struggled to get up. I'm going back to my room. She flipped over like a spoiled child and pressed Wan Ruoqing under her body. No, I want to sleep with you in my arms tonight and in the future. You're about to get married. How can you? I don't care. I want in the future. I want forever. All right. If you say forever, then forever. Wan Ruoqing said helplessly. Then her body stiffened. She blushed and whispered, sleep. Don't touch. Goddess Luo Shui grabbed her hand and put it on a soft spot on her body. She murmured, now we're even? Li looked at Mississippi Lu who was behind him helplessly and said, don't follow me. I've said it 10 times. When things in the capital are settled, I'll go with you. Why are you in such a hurry? Mississippi Lu asked lightly, what else do you have to deal with? The Chui family. If the Chui family doesn't fall, how can we leave in peace? It's not like you don't know what happened a while ago. This kind of person is insane and has no bottom line. He can do anything. You don't want the people and things related to us in the capital to be targeted by the Chui family after we leave, right? Mississippi Lu didn't ask him again this time. She turned around and walked outside. Li was stunned for a moment and asked, where are you going? Mississippi Lu replied lightly, I'll help you. Li grabbed Mississippi Lu's arm and pulled her back. He regretted telling her about it earlier. Fong stood not far away and watched the joke. Compared to Li, who was having a headache, he was obviously in a much better mood. Recently, Fong could be said to be riding on the crest of success. When he spoke, his back was much straighter. Mrs. Fong and her sworn sister, Miss Xiao, had just come back from shopping. Fong was carrying a lot of bags of various sizes in his hands, but his face was full of bright smiles. Mississippi. Lu stopped and asked, do you feel that Uncle Fong is different from before? Li was surprised and asked, what's the difference? Mississippi Lu thought for a moment and said, in the past, when he was with Mrs. Fong, he always looked sad. Recently, he has been smiling more and more. Li sighed and said, people are in high spirits when they encounter happy events. Let him be happy. I just learned 2 words yesterday and they seem to say that you can't be too happy. Mississippi Lu looked at him and said, when things reach an extreme, they will go in the opposite direction. Extreme joy begets. What is it again? Extreme joy begets sorrow. Mississippi Lu glanced at him and said, you don't need to remind me. I can also think of it. A strong man came from the front and greeted the two of them. Young master, second Mississippi. Li nodded and asked, it's old Su. Didn't you go to Qing and Mansion to pick up mother-in-law? Where is mother-in-law? Old Su sighed and said, as soon as I came to the capital, I was dragged to the streets by my mother-in-law. I didn't bring any money with me, so I came back to get some. Li waved his hand and said, go quickly. Remember to bring more? The strong man laughed and greeted the 2 people who were walking toward him. Hello, sister-in-law, hello, Miss Hong. After saying that, he realized that something was not quite right. His eyes stared straight at the young girl beside Mrs. Fong. Mrs. Fong looked at him and asked with a puzzled expression, do you know my sister? I don't know her. Sister-in-law, you go ahead. I have something to do, so I'll go back first. Old Su shook his head with a firm expression and strode forward. Mrs. Fong turned around, looked at him and shouted, stop right there. Crash. The strong man stopped in his tracks. Fong's face turned pale, and the big and small bags in his hands fell to the ground. What's wrong with him? Mississippi Lu looked at Li and asked in confusion. Li pressed one hand on his forehead and sighed. He said, he's too happy. Extreme joy begets sorrow. Chapter 909. Tell me, do you know the younger sister of the Xiao family? Mrs. Fong looked at Old Su and asked with an aggressive gaze. Old Su secretly glanced at Fong. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He trembled and said, I. Mrs. Fong put her hands on her hips and said angrily, you what? Tell me. Fong sighed. As soon as he took a step forward, he heard a sigh. The woman next to Mrs. Fong sighed and said, cousin, don't worry. I won't cause any trouble for your family. I'll go back in a few days. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone present was dumbfounded. Old Fong pursed his lips in confusion, while Old Su stood rooted to the ground in a daze. Mrs. Fong was the first to react. She pointed at Old Su and asked the woman, sister, is he the distant cousin you mentioned? The woman nodded and said, if it weren't for the disaster in my hometown, Mrs. Fong was already furious. She pointed at Old Su and scolded, you heartless man. You forgot your poor relatives when you got rich. Sister, you'll stay with us from now on. We won't trouble this heartless guy. No matter how stupid old Su was, he still reacted at this moment. He smiled apologetically and said, Sister-in-law, what are you talking about? Didn't I go to Qing'an Prefecture recently? I just missed Little Hong. Since I'm back, I naturally can't trouble you anymore. Mrs. Fang ignored her. She took her arm and said, Let's go, sister. Ignore them. Let's go back and try on the new clothes. After saying that, she glanced at Fang and stopped in her tracks. She asked, Why are you sweating so much? Fang wiped the sweat off his forehead and looked up. He sighed and said, The sun is so hot today. My eyes are sweating. Mississippi Lu looked away and said in surprise, I've been in the village for so many years. Why haven't I heard that old Su has any distant cousins? Li glanced at her and said, If he says he does, then he does. Why are you worrying about him? Mississippi Lu turned to look at him. Her expression did not change, but her grip on her sword tightened. Li touched his forehead. I have to think carefully. When are we going to the Wu Kingdom to visit my martial nephew? Her chest heaved a few times and a moment later, a forced smile appeared on her face. I'm going to the League to train the newbies. I'll be back later. The reason why the martial arts practitioners who joined the Lu League improved so quickly was that there were many masters in the League. After accumulating enough points, they could exchange for pointers from these masters. Of course, if these masters were in a good mood, they would also train the newcomers for free. Mississippi Lu was obviously in a bad mood. Although she did not know the reason, the newcomers in the League must be careful. When he was about to go out, a servant of the Li family came to report that Lord Lu of the Ministry of Justice had come to visit. Lu Yi had been investigating an important case recently, and he must have made some progress. He gave up the idea of going out, poured 2 cups of tea and sat down in the hall. Lord Li, after Lu Yi came in, he first cupped his hands and bowed to him. At Li Yi's signal, he sat across from him. Li Yi raised his teacup and asked, Has there been progress on that case? Lu Yi nodded. I've had people follow Qin for the past few days. Lord Li's guess is correct. There is indeed something wrong with the Qin family. What did you find out? Outside the capital, a manor owned by the Qin family under Qin Yan's name. There are some problems. Lu Yi's eyes were sharp. The manor is heavily guarded. Even the masters of the Secret Service can't sneak in. It doesn't look like a private garden for recreation at all. Usually, the people who enter and leave the manor are the nobles of the capital. The more it is so, the more suspicious it is. Li Yi was surprised. Even the masters of the Secret Service can't sneak in? Although there were no masters of the Grandmaster level in the Secret Service, there were many guests who were only a step away from the Grandmaster level. If even the masters of the Secret Service couldn't sneak in, it could be seen how heavily guarded the manor was. In the entire capital, perhaps only the Imperial Palace and the Department of Heavenly Punishment could compare. Lu Yi shook his head. He thought of something and said, In the process of investigating Qin, I discovered some suspicious points. What suspicious points? Lu Yi thought for a moment. Lord Li, do you know that a few years ago Qin raped his own aunt and committed the crime of incest, causing the capital to denounce him? Li Yi nodded. I heard that the woman he raped couldn't bear the humiliation and committed suicide. Later on, the Qin family suppressed the matter. Even though Prime Minister Qin is the current Minister of the Right, he has no way of influencing the people. How could the Qin family suppress the matter? Lu Yi shook his head and said, In this matter, the Cui family used the power of the King of Shu and countless dignitaries in the capital to suppress this rebellious matter. Even the Empress in the palace contributed a lot. Li Yi knew that Lu Yi would not bring up this matter for no reason, so he waited for him to continue. The woman he raped was named Lin Lian. Before entering the Qin family, she was a slightly famous actress in the capital. Later on, she caught the eye of Prime Minister Qin's 5th son, Qin He. Not long after he took her in as a concubine, that incident happened. Lin Lian is actually not the girl's real name. She was just a disciple of a performer with the surname Lin in the capital. She changed her surname after she became her master. That Lin Lian passed away a long time ago, and the disciples she took in her lifetime all had different experiences. That Miss Lin Lian is the oldest of her disciples and has inherited her acting skills. Her youngest disciple has completely inherited her skills in the art of the zither and has even surpassed her. She is extremely famous in the capital. Li Yi sighed and said, Her youngest disciple, the girl with outstanding skills on the Guqin, her stage name is. Lin Shuangshuang, right? Lu Yi nodded and said, yes, it is the deceased Lin Shuangshuang. Lin Qin, who reported to the Ministry of Justice, is also their sister. The common people only know that Chu Ping killed Lin Shuangshuang, but they have overlooked one thing. Lin Shuangshuang was already seriously ill. Even without that incident, she only had a few months to live. Lu Yi shook his head and said, this is not all suspicious. Official Zheng said that there was no such thing as a criminal. This matter was originally a trap set up by the Cui family for the Chu family. The Cui family bribed Lin Shuangshuang in advance, but their original intention was not to use Lin Shuangshuang's death to threaten the Chu family. That night, someone saw the fifth master of the Qin family, Qin He, in a restaurant across from the Fine Sound Pavilion drunk. Official Zheng once said that when there are too many coincidences, it is no longer a coincidence. Li shook his head and said, so this was not a trap set up by the Cui family for the Chu family. Lu Yi looked at him and nodded. This was a trap set up by someone for the Cui family and the Chu family. If the Chu family is crippled, the Cui family will lose an arm. Lu Yi put down his teacup and said, although Prime Minister Qin has not had much contact with the Cui family in this past year, the relationship between the two families cannot be severed. If something happens to the Qin family, the Cui family will really lose an arm. He raised his head and muttered, this fifth master Qin, what does he want to do? The Fang family. The wife of the Fang family and the girl walked into the house arm in arm. Fang came in carrying bags of various sizes. Close the door, the wife of the Fang family suddenly said. It's broad daylight, why close the door? Fang muttered. He put down the things in his hands and closed the door. The wife of the Fang family let go of the girl's hand and looked at the two of them. With a cold expression she asked, when did you start? Chapter 9-10. Fang's face changed. He raised his head and opened his mouth, but he didn't say anything. When the woman heard this, her body trembled and her face turned pale in an instant. She looked at Fang Lucia and said in panic, sister, don't. Fang Lucia waved her hand and said, don't call me that. I don't have a sister like you. Little Red's lips moved, but before she could say the next word, a mountain-like figure had already stood in front of her. Fang looked up at his wife and said in a low voice, it's all my idea. Blame me. Fang Lucia pointed her finger at him and said in a trembling voice, you really have an affair. Fang Lucia was stunned and looked at her in disbelief. You just tricked me. Well, you're really capable. Fang Lucia picked up the broom on the side and fiercely whipped him. You brought a fox spirit to our house, but you're still in the right, aren't you? Little Red's eyes were full of tears. She desperately stood in front of Fang and cried, sister, don't hit Fang Lucia. If you want to hit him, hit me. It's all my fault. I seduced him. Fang Liuxia's broom didn't fall. She collapsed on the ground and cried, why is my life so bitter? I can't live like this anymore. Fang Liuxia's face showed a painful expression. He scratched his hair hard and then loosened it powerlessly. Li Yi and Lu Yi walked out of the mansion. Lu Yi thought for a moment and said, after all, it's a serious matter. If we don't have enough evidence, we can't do anything. I'll ask them to keep an eye on it and try to get some useful clues. Don't bother. Li Yi waved to the sloppy old man not far away and said, Su, I need your help with something. 10 drumsticks. The sloppy old man had recently understood that White Rabbit creamy candies was not a long-term solution. Under the influence of his second granduncle, he had a special liking for drumsticks. This was not the only thing he had learned from his second granduncle. Yesterday he had even asked Li Yi to make him a rocking chair that was exactly the same as his second granduncle's. Li Yi nodded. Deal. It was just cooking once. Xiao Huan's body was still growing during this period of time. She should eat more good food to nourish herself. After 2 years, it would be difficult to nourish herself again. The sloppy old man glanced at Louis Chang. What are you waiting for? Let's go. Louis looked at him. Li Yi waved his hand and said, if there's anything, tell Su. You guys just have to wait for the news. Grandmasters could be said to be the pinnacle of martial artists. Ordinary martial artists could only be found but not sought after. Using them to gather information was definitely a waste of their talents. After sending them off, when he was about to walk back, he saw a figure squatting in the corner with his head buried between his knees. There was no sound at all. Li looked around, walked over, and asked in confusion, what's wrong now? Didn't you make it clear just now? Fang raised his head and said in a hoarse voice, Xiaohong is gone. Li was stunned. He looked at him and asked tentatively, "Your wife knows?" Fong nodded. Li squatted down beside him and wanted to say some comforting words. When the words were about to come out, they only turned into a sigh. "Don't be anxious about this kind of thing. Let's take it slow." Fong raised his head and looked at him with burning eyes. He asked, "Young master, am I too much of a jerk?" After that, he lowered his head and shook his head. "No, I shouldn't ask you this question." The problem that Fong encountered could only be solved by himself. No one else could help or intervene. Li Yi's own affairs were even more complicated. They needed to be done step by step and could not be rushed. Beast, he's a beast. The sloppy old man came in from outside angrily. Li Yi was worried that he would get angry and tear down the house. He hurriedly stood up and asked, "What happened?" The sloppy old man was still angry. "That place is a devil's den. I've lived for a long time, but I've never seen such a crazy person. The owner of that place should be killed by 1,000 cuts. If it weren't for Lu's repeated orders yesterday, I would have massacred that devil's den." Lu Yi followed behind and said in a low voice, "Your Excellency, it's almost certain that those missing women are related to the Qin family. The previous Peng family should have set up a trap for Chu Ping. That place is the root of evil." Li looked at him. "That place and the Peng family?" Lu Yi gritted his teeth. "It's the same place. I've already sent people to the Secret Intelligence Office to send more people. There's no time to lose. We need to act immediately." Lu Yi said a few words in a hurry. Someone from the Secret Intelligence Office came to report and left in a hurry. After the sloppy old man sat down, he gulped down a few mouthfuls of tea and recounted everything he had seen last night. The women tied up in the room were obviously different from the prostitutes outside. They no longer knew how to resist. Their eyes were empty and vacant, and they could only be manipulated. When the sloppy old man said this, he crushed 3 cups and smashed a wooden table. Li Yi had taken away the precious purple clay teapot in time to avoid this disaster. He shook his head and said, "The Secret Intelligence Office has already mobilized all their forces. Calm down and wait for the news." As soon as he finished speaking, Fong walked in from outside in a daze. He looked at Li Yi and said in a daze, "Young master, Little Red is missing." Li Yi said in surprise, "Missing? She didn't return to the Jade Courtyard?" Fong shook his head and said, "No, I asked the madam. She said that Little Red hasn't returned since she left last time." Li Yi thought for a moment and asked again, "What about Drunken Ink?" Fong looked anxious. "I went there too. Little Chui said she didn't go there either. She didn't go back last night. She didn't bring any money with her. She doesn't know anyone in the capital. Where could she go?" "Don't worry," Li Yi said as he walked out of the door. "Think about it first. Where else could she have gone? I'll ask the brothel and the government to inquire about the news." Outside the door, Fong Liushir's face was pale and her expression was extremely remorseful. Seeing Fong come out, she went to greet him and wanted to say something. But Fong just glanced at her and left in a hurry. In the Qin family, Qin Yen looked at his son who walked in from outside and asked with a sullen face, "You didn't return last night. What did you do?" "I went to find a friend to drink." Qin Yu looked drunk. He shook his head and said, "If there's nothing else, I'll go back to my room first. I'm sleepy, this bastard." Qin Yen looked at his swaying back and forth as he left. He waved his hand and shook his head helplessly. "Has everything been taken care of?" Passing through a moon door, Qin Yu's drunkenness disappeared and he asked in a low voice. The person beside him immediately said, "Little Duke, don't worry. The person has been moved. This time they'll definitely come empty-handed." "A bunch of idiots." Qin Yu twitched the corner of his mouth and then a trace of coldness appeared on his face. He murmured, "Li Yi County Marquis Li Dr. Li. I'll see how long you can be proud for." The coldness flashed across his face and he asked again, "That woman last night?" The person nodded repeatedly. "She's been sent to your room." Qin Yu didn't speak again. He walked to the door and pushed it open. Seeing the empty room, his face instantly darkened. "Where is she?" Chapter 9-11. Little Red had disappeared. Not only had Li Yi made arrangements for the brothel, but he had also informed the county government and even the Secret Intelligence Office. They had already acted quickly. All they could do now was wait. There was no news, but Lu Yi soon came. "There's a traitor in the Secret Intelligence Office." Louis's face was as calm as still water. He said slowly, when we brought people there were no traces left. There were only a few servants of the Qin family, but they had something on them. After all, that was the house of an important official in the court. It's a bit troublesome. Li looked at him and asked, "You didn't find any clues at all?" Louis shook his head. "One night is enough for them to move the people away. Other clues are not enough to be used as evidence. There are people watching the surroundings and there are no suspicious people coming in or out. There should be a secret passage inside, but we have no reason to search it now." "What about the traitor?" Li asked. "He committed suicide." Louis shook his head and said, "That person has been in the secret intelligence office for nearly 20 years. When we found him, he bit the poison sac and didn't say a word." "I see." Li nodded and asked again, "Do you know which family the carriages that go in and out usually belong to?" "There are records of them." Louis replied, then raised his head and said, "But sir, with just these, I'm afraid it's difficult to form evidence. Moreover, those people are all nobles in the capital, and their status is extraordinary." Li waved his hand. "These are enough." The secret intelligence office had a special status in the court, but it was still troublesome to encounter such things. Louis would have a headache later. Breaking into a private house was not a big deal in other places, but this was the capital and everything had to be done according to the law. Moreover, the court had changed the law not long ago against the opposition of countless nobles. If the court protected the secret intelligence office breaking into an official's house, it would undoubtedly be contradictory. It would give those people a reason and maybe something more serious would happen. To be honest, even Li Yi himself didn't expect that they could plant people in the secret intelligence office. He had to admit that he had underestimated the Cui family. This time, Louis had returned without any results. They would definitely be more careful and even stop all actions. If they wanted to collect evidence through normal channels, it would be very difficult. Crack. In the end, Li Yi did not manage to keep the teapot. "You didn't find him?" The sloppy old man slammed his palm on the new table, causing it to shatter. The teapot on top of it also fell to the ground and broke into several pieces. "Are they messing with me?" The anger on the sloppy old man's face didn't last long. He quickly revealed a smile, stroked his beard and muttered, "Interesting, interesting. How many years has it been since I've encountered something so interesting?" The smile on his face was like that of a benevolent elder, but the servant girl who came in to clean up the mess couldn't help but shiver. She felt her body was a little cold and her hands moved a little faster. "Cui family." Cui Qingming sighed and said, "What a pity. In the past 20 years, there was only one spy left in the secret intelligence office. Now there's no one left." Someone beside him comforted, "Second brother, there's no need to sigh. As the saying goes, there's no gain without loss. Although we've lost that spy, the secret intelligence office recklessly intruded into an official's residence. This is not a small crime. The imperial court has reformed the law and it can't be overturned. With Liu Yi around, the Ministry of Justice is almost unable to interfere. If we get rid of him, it will be much more convenient to do things in the future." Cui Qingming nodded and said, "Let them be prepared. This time if we don't pull Liu Yi down completely we won't rest." The Cui clan hated Liu Yi to the bone. At that time, it was precisely because of Liu Yi's meddling that caused all their arrangements and deployments towards the Chu clan to turn into ash. The Chu clan had fallen, and the Cui clan had lost an arm. If this matter were to implicate the Qin clan and those people, then they would really arrive at the end of their rope. At this point, they almost understood that it was unlikely for His Majesty to summon the King of Shu back. But if the status quo was maintained, it might not be a bad thing for them. Once His Majesty passed away, who was more suitable than the King of Shu in terms of identity and status when the position of the Eastern Palace was vacant? If it really came to that, it would be much easier for them to do things. Cui Qingming showed a sarcastic smile and said, "I really want to see with my own eyes what expression County Marquis Li has now." Li Yi was naturally anxious, but it was not because of the secret intelligence office. As long as he knew the facts, the evidence was not important. What he was worried about was that if something really happened to Little Red, Old Fang's family would be ruined. However, the brothel and the government were not omnipotent. Even if they were to find clues, it would take time. Instead of searching around like a headless fly, it was better to wait here. Some people of the Cui family were also anxious. "Little Duke, I've asked the front and back doors and no strange woman came in or out. That woman must be hiding somewhere in the mansion. If you look hard, you can definitely find her." Qin Yu glanced at him coldly and said, "Go and look for her." Go and look for her in every room in the mansion. The servant was stunned and asked again, Go and look for her in every room. Prime Minister and the masters. Jianghu kicked him and said, Except for those few, don't let anyone go. In a remote and messy woodshed in Jianghu's mansion, a woman looked at the figure covered in a black cloak and said gratefully, Thank you for saving me, my benefactor. Little Red, why are you here? A hoarse voice came from the black cloak, and it was not difficult to tell that it was a woman's voice. I was caught by them, the woman replied. Then she realized something and asked in shock, How do you know my name is Little Red? The person in the black cloak put down the hood of her cloak. It was an ordinary-looking woman, but there was a long scar on her face, which looked a little scary. The woman looked at her and said, I went down the mountain with Uncle Fong and saw you on the road. Little Red's expression was a little excited. She grabbed her sleeve and asked, You know Big Brother Fong? The woman with the long scar on her face did not answer this question. Instead, she looked at her and said, This place is very remote. They can't find this place. You hide here first. I'll think of a way to spread the news. As soon as she finished speaking, there was a sudden urgent knock on the door. The woman's expression changed. She hurriedly let Little Red hide in a large vat and threw her black cloak inside. She carried a bundle of firewood and walked to the door. She asked, Who is it? The firewood is not ready yet. Wait a moment. A rough voice came from outside the door. Open the door. The community sends warmth. Chapter 9:12. Hearing the voice outside, the woman with the scar on her face calmed down a bit and asked, Wu, brother Wu? It's me, Xiaomei. Open the door. There's not enough time. Wu Er's voice came from outside. Lu Mei opened the door and looked at the man outside. She asked in confusion, What's not enough time? There's not enough time to explain. Wu Er closed the door and said, Hurry and call the girl out. Those people are coming. As soon as he finished speaking, the sound of messy footsteps could be heard. Lu Mei's expression changed greatly. Wu Er closed the door and grabbed her arm. He said in a low voice, Let's go. I'll tell you in detail later. Search. A group of Qin family guards kicked open the door of the woodshed and searched inside and out. They also looked at the woodpile, water tanks and other places where people could hide, but they didn't find anything. The leader waved his hand and said, Search other places. Qin Manor, back residence. Wu Er led the two of them through the narrow path between the rock garden and the wall. Lu Mei hesitated for a moment and finally couldn't help but ask, Brother Wu, how did you know? Now is not the time to talk about this. Wu Er quickly said, They are searching the entire Qin Manor. It's not safe to hide there. I'll take you to a safe place. Xiao Hong followed and said in a weak voice, Thank you, big brother. No need to thank me. Wu Er smiled and said, If you want to thank someone, thank Fifth Lord. Otherwise, such a beautiful girl would have been defiled by that beast Jianghu again. The three of them were in a deserted garden in the Qin family. The weeds were as tall as a person and they followed the narrow path between the rock garden. They didn't encounter anyone along the way. Somewhere Wu Er pushed open a small door. After the three of them walked in and closed it from the inside, he let out a sigh of relief and said with a smile, Okay, we're safe now. The small door was clearly the back door of a house. Wu Er took the two of them to the front yard. A middle-aged man was already standing there waiting. Wu Er walked over and said with a smile, Fifth Lord, I've brought the girl. Fifth Lord nodded and looked at the girl. I'm afraid it's not easy to send you out from here. Do you have any family in the capital? Xiao Hong thought for a moment and was about to speak. She paused and said after a long time, Just tell the Madam of Jade Courtyard that I'm here and she will know what to do. Fifth Lord shook his head and said, If that's all, I'm afraid it won't work. Miss doesn't know where this place is. Open the door, open the door. Suddenly, the sound of knocking came from outside the courtyard. The knocking was so forceful that it seemed like the entire door was going to crack. Qin Clan's fifth master glanced at Wu Er, who immediately understood. He walked over and whispered, Follow me. The fifth master of the Qin family walked to the door and opened it. He asked, Why did you use so much force? Fifth Lord, the head guard first casually greeted him and said, A servant girl in the mansion ran away, and now the whole mansion is being searched. Of course we are not suspecting Fifth Lord but just doing a routine search. Fifth Lord, you don't mind, right? The fifth master of the Qin family waved his hand and said, Go ahead. Be careful and don't break anything. They swaggered in. The fifth master of the Qin family stood in the yard and watched them rummaging in the yard. When they went back into the house, he hurriedly followed them and said, "Be careful. If you break anything you can't afford to pay for it." They didn't dare to be too arrogant. After searching for a while, the leader knocked on a wall on the inside and pushed it hard. He asked, "There won't be a secret door here, right?" Fifth Master Qin smiled. "How could it be?" Unable to find anything here, the guard waved his hand. "Let's go to the next place." Fifth Master Qin followed them out. After closing the door, he walked back. He knocked on the wall that the guard had pushed 3 times, paused for a moment, and then hurriedly knocked 3 more times. A moment later, a heavy sound came from behind the wall, and the wall slowly turned to an angle. Wu Er came out from behind the wall, wiped the sweat from his forehead and complained, "Fifth Master, this wall really needs to be repaired. It's so hard to switch it on and off." Fifth Master Qin waved his hand and said, "Sit down and rest for a while." Wu Er sat down at the table, picked up a teapot and gulped down a mouthful of tea. Then he asked, "Fifth Master, we saved Miss Hong. What should we do now? It's impossible for us to send her out alone." Fifth Master Qin shook his head, looked at him and said, "Go find this girl's family and report it to the authorities." "Ah." Wu Er was stunned and said, "Report to the authorities? But Fifth Master, this is the Qin family. We should have a bottom line." Fifth Master Qin looked at him, shook his head and said, "What's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. This has nothing to do with whether I'm a member of the Qin family or not." "Fifth Master, you?" Wu Er stood up with a solemn expression. He bowed to him and said, "You're really a good person. It's just for justice." Wu Er nodded and asked, "Which official should I report to? The capital magistrate or the capital governor?" Fifth Master Qin looked at him, smiled and said, "Report whichever one you like. I believe you know what to do." Wu Er patted his chest and said, "Don't worry, Fifth Master. I won't let you down." Wu Er strode out. Fifth Master Qin looked at the two of them and said, "I'm afraid you'll have to suffer for a while." The 2 women thanked him repeatedly. Fifth Master Qin looked behind him and saw that the gambling wall was still tilted. He walked over and shook his head, saying, "This Wu Er is always careless and forgets to close it again." He stretched out a hand and closed the wall until it was seamless. Then he walked over, looked at the 2 women, smiled and said, "It's still early. What do you want to drink, tea or something else? The county government or the prefecture government?" On a street somewhere in the capital, Wu Er looked up, murmured and stepped into a mansion. He said to the guard at the door, "Find Lord Li, in the courtyard of the Li mansion." Fong Lucia looked at Fong with a regretful expression. "It's all my fault. If it weren't for me she wouldn't have left." Fong squatted on the ground, sighed and shook his head, saying, "It's not your fault. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have hidden it from you." Fong Lucia lowered her head and said, If she can come back you can do whatever you want." If he had heard this earlier, he would have been extremely excited, but at this moment, he couldn't bring himself to think about it at all. "Hey Fong, long time no see." A figure came in from outside and looked at Fong. He first greeted him with a smile and then asked, "Is Lord Li here?" Fong waved his hand and said in a hoarse voice, "Inside." Hearing the voice outside, Li had already come out. When he saw Wu Er, he asked in surprise, "Why are you here?" "I'm here to report a case." Wu Er touched his head and said with a smile, "Qin, you took a girl back. Fifth Master and I secretly saved her. We couldn't send her out, so Fifth Master asked me to come out and report the case." "Took a girl?" "Yes." Wu Er nodded and said, "This time the evidence is conclusive. He can't run away. But we still have to go to the Jade Courtyard." The girl said that only the Madam of the Jade Courtyard can report the case. The Madam of the Jade Courtyard. Fong's body trembled. He suddenly got up and ran over quickly. He grabbed Wu Er's arm and asked, "What's the name of the girl you mentioned?" Wu Er scratched his head. I think her name is Xiao Hong." The tight string in Fong's heart finally loosened and he slumped to the ground. When Fong Lucia hurried to help him, he seemed to remember something and asked, "What did you say just now?" "If Xiao Hong can come back." Fong Lucia looked puzzled. "What did I say just now?" Chapter 913. Yesterday, the Secret Intelligence Division broke into an official's residence. Today there were many impeachment memorials. This organization had always had a mixed reputation. At a critical moment, there was no lack of people hitting someone when they were down. The court was in turmoil. Even if there were clues, they couldn't break into the minister's residence again. After the capital's magistrate, Lu Dayo, received the report from the Madam of the Jade Courtyard, he considered the special nature of this case and asked the princess as quickly as possible. After receiving the order to search the Qin manor, he rushed over with the bailiffs of the county yamen. Among the many bailiffs, the person leading them was a burly man. His face was filled with anxiety as he urged the bailiffs to hurry up. Li manor. Wu Er scratched his head and said to Li Yi, "My lord, if there's nothing else, I'll be going back first." Li Yi thought for a moment, looked at him and asked, "How did Qin He know that Qin Yu captured a girl and brought her into the manor?" "I don't know either." Wu Er shook his head and said, "Fifth Lord only told me to save Xiaomei and that girl. I don't know how Fifth Lord found out about this." Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "I'm afraid he already knows about you. You don't need to go back. Haven't you always wanted to go to the Lumeng? You can go there now." Wu Er smiled and said, "There's no hurry. I still want to go back. Maybe I can be of some use?" Li Yi hesitated for a moment and nodded. "Next, there may be some unrest in the Qin family. Be careful." "I know." Wu Er nodded. "I'll be going back first." In front of the Qin manor, Lu Dayo politely bowed to Qin Yan and said, "This is an important matter. This official has already asked the princess. Please cooperate, my lord Qin." Qin Yan's expression was unsightly as he questioned. "Yesterday the Secret Intelligence Division barged into the Qin residence, but Lord Lu actually brought bailiffs here today to arrest people. What kind of place do you think the Qin residence is? Is it a place that you can enter and search as you please?" The expression on Lu Dayo's face was very polite. He said again, "There are witnesses who saw that after the young lady was kidnapped, she entered the backyard of Qin Manor. It's not that I don't believe you, Lord Qin, but this case is really too important. It's also related to another big case that even His Majesty is very concerned about. I really have no choice but to do this. Let them search." Qin Yan wanted to say something else, but an elderly voice came from behind him. Qin Xiang waved his hand. There was no joy or anger on his face. Since it wasn't done by the Qin family, what harm is there in searching? "But if we let them enter, where would the face of my Qin family be?" he retorted. Seeing that Qin Xiang's face was still expressionless, he gloomily looked at Lu Dayo and said, "Lord Lu, this official can let you in. If you can find that woman in my Qin residence today, I, Qin Yan, have nothing to say. If you can't find her, then tomorrow in court, Lord Lu will have already prepared an excuse." "Thank you, Lord Qin." Lu Dayo cupped his hands and turned his head to order, "This is the Qin residence. You can search but do not act rashly." Under the lead of the large man, more than 10 bailiffs filed in. "Trash, how could there not be? Could it be that she can grow wings and fly out of the residence?" Qin Yu's face was gloomy as he coldly asked. A Qin family servant shivered and said, "Little High Duke, other than the Prime Minister's room, we've already searched the entire Qin residence inside and out. We really haven't found that woman. It's possible that she really has escaped." "Escaped? What do you think this Qin residence is?" Qin Yu suddenly threw the teacup over. The servant let the teacup hit his head and didn't dare to dodge. He didn't even dare to wipe the blood that flowed down. At this time, another person ran in from outside in a panic and said in panic, "Little High Duke, it's bad. The government has come to the Qin residence to search. They said that we've captured a woman." Qin Yu coldly glanced at that person. "When you captured her yesterday, did someone see you?" That person's expression changed. "No, no." Qin Yu thought for a moment, waved his hand and said, "If they want to search, then let them search." The Qin family servant raised his head and asked carefully, "Little High Duke, what if they really find her?" Qin Yu looked at him coldly. "If they really find her, I'll chop you up and feed you to the dogs." Wu Er hurriedly walked into the room and said, "Fifth Master, the capital magistrate has brought people over." Fifth Master Qin glanced at him and asked, "Why are you back?" Wu Er said in surprise, "I came back after reporting to the government. Where else can I go?" Fifth Master Qin's gaze stayed on his face for a moment and said, "Forget it, it's not important. The 2 girls have gone out from the back door. The county government's bailiffs will find them." He clasped his hands behind his back and walked out of the courtyard. Wu Er asked in surprise, "Fifth Master, where are you going?" "Going out for a walk." Fifth Master Qin didn't look back but waved his hand behind him. "I'll walk alone. You don't have to follow me this time." Wu Er stopped. After touching his head, he nodded and said, "Okay." The bailiffs searched carefully in Qin's mansion. They were very patient in the face of some uncooperative people. After all, this was Qin's mansion. Even if Lord Lu didn't specifically instruct them, they didn't dare to act rashly. However, many servants of Qin's mansion looked at them from a distance, pointing at the group of people and talking. Wuxia walked over leisurely with his hands behind his back. He pointed at the bailiffs and said, "This is the yard of the second master. How can there be people hiding here? Be careful. Don't break anything. You can't afford to pay for it." The leading man's face darkened. He pointed in a direction and said, "Go over there and find them. Over there. That's the residence of the third master. The third master is a fifth-level official in the imperial court. He's very honest. It's impossible for him to hide people. Go over there, that's the residence of the servants. You can go if you want. Anyway, I don't think it's a good place to hide people." The leading man looked back at him and asked, "Then where do you think it's a good place to hide people?" Wuxia shook his head and glanced in a certain direction. "Then how do I know?" The leading man pointed at that place and asked, "What's that place?" "That place." Wuxia glanced at it and shook his head. "I don't know." After saying that, he walked away leisurely. The leading man suddenly waved his hand and pointed in that direction. "Search." In a deserted garden in the backyard of Qin's mansion, the bailiffs found two women behind a rockery. When one of the women saw the man dressed as a bailiff, her face lit up with joy. She took 2 quick steps forward and then stopped. She knelt on the ground and said in a loud voice, "Your Excellency, you must seek justice for me." Seeing this scene, the expressions of the people of Qin's family who followed them changed greatly. Some people in the distance looked even more frightened. They had searched this place many times just now. There was no one at all. "Little Duke, it's bad." They found the woman in the backyard. A servant of Qin's family rushed into Qin Yu's residence and said in a panic. Qin Yu clenched his fists and his face was extremely gloomy. The servant said anxiously, "Little Duke, it's better to hide first. You won't be able to leave in a while." Qin Yu looked outside, loosened his clenched fists and turned into the backyard. In the capital, when night gradually fell, a dry well in the courtyard of a house 2 streets away from Qin's mansion suddenly lit up with a faint light. The rope tied to a tree outside the well swayed for a long time before a figure climbed out of the well with difficulty. He looked back at the well and said in a low voice, "Hurry up. Take advantage of the darkness to go to the Chui family." In the courtyard, a figure who had been sitting for a long time sighed. "Why did you come so late? I've been waiting for you for a long time." Qin Yu suddenly turned his head. "Who is it?" He only saw a vague figure in the darkness and suddenly felt a pain in his neck. His whole body weakly fell to the ground. Chapter 9:14. Qin Manor. All of the Qin family's servants temporarily stopped what they were doing. They were absent-minded and would occasionally look in a certain direction in the manor. In a very spacious hall, Qin Xiang looked at the young woman in the hall and said in a deep voice, "Where is he?" A servant of the Qin manor walked in from outside and said respectfully, replying to the Prime Minister, "The young duke is not in the room." Lu Dao bowed to Prime Minister Qin and turned to look at Qin Yan. He cupped his hands and said, "Sir Qin, this young Duke Qin forcefully kidnapped a civilian girl." Qin Yan's face was gloomy and he said coldly, "Sir Lu, you should be careful with your words. Although our court does not use words to convict people before the matter is clear, it is best not to speak carelessly." After Qin Yan finished speaking, he looked at the woman and asked with a gloomy expression, "You said that you were kidnapped and sent here?" The man who looked like a bailiff frowned and took half a step forward, but he was stopped by Lu Dao. The woman nodded and said, "Yes." Qin Yan asked again, "Then how did you escape the room?" The woman opened her mouth, but before she could say anything, a silhouette stepped out from behind her. The woman with a scar on her face stared straight at Qin Yan as she spoke. "I heard this young lady calling for help in her room, so I secretly let her out." Qin Yan frowned. You what you?" The man finally couldn't take it anymore. He took a step forward and said, "The witness and material evidence are conclusive. Do you still want to deny it?" "You are." Just as Qin Yan's anger rose, he was interrupted by Lu Dao. County Magistrate Lu smiled and said, "The country has its laws. The young duke forcefully kidnapped a civilian girl. This is an established fact. Her Highness the Princess has ordered this case to be investigated strictly. I hope that Sir Qin will not hide the information about the young duke. Qin Yan impatiently shook his head. I don't know where he is. This official is just reminding you. County Magistrate Lu smiled and respectfully bowed to Prime Minister Qin before saying, Let's go. Wait a moment. Qin Yan stretched out his hand and pointed at the woman with a scar on her face. He said, She's a maidservant of my Qin clan. Lord Lu, are you taking her away as well? Lu Dao shook his head and said, What are you talking about, Mr. Qin? This girl is the key to this case. Of course we have to take her with us. Qin Yan glared fiercely at the woman, but in the end he didn't make any further movements to stop her. Qin Xiang held his forehead and leaned back in his chair. He closed his eyes and muttered, This bastard, this bastard. Qin Yan clenched his fists and walked to the door. He looked at a servant of the Qin clan and asked in a low voice, Where is that unfilial son? The man said in a low voice, They left through the secret passage. Qin Yan lowered his voice and said, Tell him to stay outside during this period of time. Don't come back. Although similar cases had occurred in the past, times had changed. The new system of the imperial court had just been established, and it was time for them to enforce the law. If they were caught, the punishment would not be light. In the distance he saw a person walk over. With a dark expression he asked, Where did you go this time? The Qin clan's fifth master, who reeked of alcohol and his clothes in disarray, cut a sorry figure, walked over. He looked around and asked, Just now I saw an official leave. Did something happen? As he spoke, the smell of alcohol filled the air. Qin Yan took a step back in disgust and asked, How did you end up like this again? You've lost all the face of the Qin clan. The Qin clan's fifth master waved his hand and said, On the way back I met a mad dog. As a member of the Qin clan, I obviously couldn't allow it to randomly bite me. Wouldn't that be losing face for the Qin clan? So, I broke its 5 legs and broke its teeth. Nonsense. Qin Yan waved his hand in extreme disgust. Someone bring him back to the room. A sturdy figure hurriedly ran over and supported the Qin clan's fifth master with practiced ease. As they walked back he said in a small voice, Fifth master is really drunk. How can a dog have 5 legs? The Qin clan's fifth master shook his head and countered, You have 3 legs, why can't a dog have 5? It's all my fault. I've wronged you, it's not big sister's fault. I was careless. You're still willing to call me sister? I'm the one who doesn't deserve to be your sister. After apologizing to each other, the 2 women hugged each other and cried. Fong, on the other hand, was full of smiles. His smile was so wide that it almost reached his eyebrows. Li looked at the back corner. The lady who had not raised her head since she walked in, pulled Xiao Huan's sleeve, signaling to her. The servant girl immediately understood. She slowly walked over and looked at the woman with a scar on her face. She pulled the woman's hand and whispered, Sister Lu Mei, come in. The eldest miss and the second miss are inside. Son-in-law, of course I know this. Fong patted his chest and said, Even though Lu Lao-san is not a good person, I am indebted to Xiao Mei. In the future I will treat her as my daughter. Li shook his head and said, You treat her as your daughter. She treats Xiao Hong as her sister. You treat Xiao Hong as, You are the one who is not a good person. Fong ran away with a red face. Lu Dao walked over and shook his head, saying, Master Li Qinyu ran away. I'm afraid it won't be easy to catch him. Kidnapping a commoner girl is not a small matter, but it's not a big matter either. Moreover, it didn't lead to a tragedy. I'm afraid the Qin family won't be touched. Who said I was going to touch the Qin family? Li shook his head and looked at Fong, who was being lovingly beaten by Fong's wife. He said, It's good that he's fine. As for the other things, we can take it slow. What do you mean by it's not a big matter, but it's not a small matter? The sloppy old man frowned, looked at Lu Dao and asked, Do you know what that place looks like? What that bastard committed was more than just kidnapping a commoner girl. If he hadn't run fast, this old man would have let him see all kinds of strange martial arts in this world, so that his life wouldn't have been in vain. The sloppy old man was very excited and angry. Li could understand. This time he was really made a fool of. If he couldn't get back at them, he was afraid that it would be difficult to untie the knot in his heart. Maybe even his heart of martial arts would be affected. Li looked at him and said, Su, don't be excited. Don't worry, I promise to find out this matter soon. When the time comes, I will let you do it yourself. Those who should be punished will not be spared. A worried look appeared on County Magistrate Lu's face. He said, With such a thing happening to the Qin family, I'm afraid that very few people will impeach Lu Yi. It's best to let him investigate this matter. However, last time we alerted the enemy. I'm afraid it won't be easy to investigate again. Li Yi shook his head and said, in the morning assembly tomorrow, Lord Lu will impeach Lu Yi in front of all the officials. He used his identity as a spy to break into an official's house and was lawless. Ah! County Magistrate Lu was stunned and couldn't believe his ears. Forget it, your identity is not suitable. Li Yi thought for a moment, then shook his head and said, let's change it to Lord Zheng. When Lord Lu goes back, please go to the capital governor's mansion. County Magistrate Lu thought for a moment and asked doubtfully, Lord Li, forgive this lowly official for being slow-witted, but why do we impeach Lu Yi? Lord Lu is very careful. After Lord Zheng impeaches Lu Yi, Li Yi looked at Lu Daiyou and said, Lord Lu, please write down the names of those who follow the trend. Chapter 9:15. Lu Daiyou gazed at Li Yi in a daze for a long time. Only then did he raise his hands in a somewhat ashamed gesture and say, Sir is wise. The actions of the county government were completely unconcealed. The matter of the Duke of Qin forcefully abducting a woman and fleeing to escape punishment quickly spread throughout Jianghu. This was not the first time the Duke had done such a despicable thing. He had done many more shameless things before, but by relying on his powerful background, he was able to settle them all. However, that was then and this was now. Recently it was a special time. Let alone the Duke, even if it was a prince committing a crime, it had to be tried according to the rules. Otherwise, the court, which had just reformed the law, would be slapping itself in the face. Countless people were waiting to see them make a fool of themselves. Of course, no law could be changed overnight. Perhaps the Qin family would be condemned by public opinion, but it would not be able to harm their foundation. Although the people were helpless, they could only accept this reality. The Cui family. Qin Yan gazed at Cui Qingming with a face full of surprise and asked, he hasn't come to the Cui family? Cui Qingming shook his head and said, earlier he only sent someone to tell me about the secret intelligence office. He didn't come tonight. He then shook his head and said, today is different from the past. He really should be more careful. If he is caught by the government, it will be troublesome. After this incident, I will let him stay at home peacefully for a period of time. When His Highness the King of Shu returns, everything will be settled. Qin Yan sighed and said, I'll go to the other families to see. If this unfilial son isn't in the Cui family, where can he hide? After Qin Yan left, a person walked up to Cui Qingming and said in a small voice, the matter of Qin Yu is only a small matter. Its influence is limited. I'm just afraid that once they catch Qin Yu and dig out some other things from his mouth, things will be very bad. Cui Qingming thought about it and waved his hand. Even if they really dig it out, what can they do? If they really have the guts to dig it out, there's no harm in helping them. The middle-aged man beside him paused and seemed to realize something. He then smiled and said, second brother is right. Even if they have the guts, they don't have the strength. Late at night, Qin Yan dragged his tired body back to the Qin manor. His expression was dark as he muttered to himself, just where did this unfilial son go? It was rare for Li Yi to wake up early today. In fact, there would always be 1 or 2 days a month when he had to wake up early. Not only was he tortured by Li Duan, but Mississippi Lu had also pestered him to study with her until midnight last night. He was severely lacking in sleep. Before the old emperor arrived, he wanted to lean against a pillar and take a nap. However, a fly kept buzzing in his ears, and he couldn't chase it away no matter how hard he tried. Li Xian frowned and said, what's going on with Lu Yi? Isn't he usually very cautious? Why is he so reckless this time? When I came over just now, I heard a lot of people talking about him in front of His Majesty. Li Yi struggled to open his eyes and said weakly, fine. Don't talk. The court is about to begin. Let me sleep for a while. Li Xian looked at him and asked in surprise, what's wrong with you? Why do you look so listless? Li Yi glanced at him and said, if you had an energetic wife or sister, she wouldn't be much better than me. The surprise on Li Xian's face turned into shock. He asked in a low voice, you've already taken her down? Before Li Yi could understand what he was saying, a eunuch announced in a sharp voice that His Majesty had arrived. When the old emperor went to court, he needed 2 eunuchs to support him. The eldest princess sat on the lower right side of the emperor. The officials greeted her one after another. My ministers, what important matter do you have to report to me today? He looked down at the people below. His voice was still calm, but it didn't have the same imposing manner as before. In the main hall, Cui Qingming met the eyes of several people and nodded slightly. One of them was about to step forward, but someone else in front of him stepped forward before him. Cui Qingming's eyes narrowed as he looked at the figure in front of the hall. The capital governor, Zheng Shichen, bowed and said, "Your Majesty, I accuse the Assistant Minister of Justice, Liu Yi. Relying on your Majesty's favor, he disregarded the law and brought people from the secret bureau to break into the official residence." Cui Qingming was startled, and some doubt appeared on his face. Zheng Shichen actually wanted to impeach Liu Yi. Could it be that he had guessed wrong? However, this wasn't the time to think about these things. He signaled with his eyes, and a few more people stepped forward. "I accuse the Assistant Minister of Justice, Liu Yi." "I second that." For a moment, Lord Liu Yi, who had risen from a small bailiff to the position of Assistant Minister of Justice in the past 2 years, became the target of public criticism. People kept stepping forward to impeach him, but the reasons for the impeachment weren't exactly the same. Behind the crowd, a gaze swept across the people who stepped forward one by one. It swept back and forth a few times before he took out a brush from his sleeve and began to write on the ceremonial tablet. The people stepped forward one by one in an orderly manner. At some point, a white-haired old man stepped forward. "It's Lord Zhao." Even Lord Zhao can't stand the actions of the Secret Intelligence Bureau? Although the old man's official position wasn't prominent, he was known for his knowledge and had many students. Of course, the most important thing was that he was old enough to speak freely in the court. "I accuse the Women's College of misleading the students. They actually spread the fallacy that parents with single eyelids cannot have children with double eyelids. This is completely unsubstantiated." Lord Zhao's words confused all the court officials in the hall. Wasn't everyone criticizing Liu Yi just now? The atmosphere was unprecedentedly high. If they put in more effort, they might be able to pull him down from the position of Assistant Minister of Justice. Had Lord Zhao gone senile? Why did he run out at this time to join in the fun? The court officials didn't care. The ceremonial tablet in the hands of the capital magistrate Liu Daiyou fell to the ground, and he hurriedly picked it up. Li Xian's mouth was wide open, and his face was full of horror. Li Yi opened his eyes and he was no longer sleepy. In the main hall, there was no expression on Emperor Jing's face. Below him, the eldest princess, who had always been as still as a mountain, had the beads hanging from the phoenix crown on her head shake. Lord Zhao's interruption was very untimely. It was very likely that he would change the topic and cause His Majesty to overlook Liu Yi's crimes. Some people began to suspect that Lord Zhao, who had always taken a clear stand, had gone senile or had betrayed them. But at the moment this was not important. Soon, someone stood up and continued the previous topic. He bowed and said, "Your Majesty, in the past 2 years, the Secret Bureau has relied on Your Majesty's favor and has become more and more lawless. If we don't control it, I'm afraid it will be detrimental to the court." Everyone ignored Lord Zhao and brought the topic back. Lord Zhao originally wanted to say something, but after hearing a few whispers from the people beside him, he had no choice but to give up. So many people in the court had stood up one after another. Even the emperor couldn't ignore the opinions of so many people. Emperor Jing stood up from the dragon throne and said, "Since there are so many people impeaching, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Liu Yi, will temporarily suspend the matters at hand. The matter of the Secret Bureau breaking into the official residence will be handed over to the Supreme Court for trial." After dealing with the Secret Bureau case, the court officials didn't have many important things to report. After the eunuch announced the dismissal of the court, Li Yi felt relieved and slowly walked outside with Li Xian. "County Marquis Li, Crown Prince." A eunuch quickly walked over from behind and said, "His Majesty has summoned you. Please move to the Hall of Diligent Government." You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.